All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. As always, today we're here to talk about one of the biggest scams out there, biggest government scams, biggest disease scams, and it's one that almost nobody talks about, probably because it's affecting deer. If this problem was about dogs, everybody would care. But since it's only about deer, there are only a few very passionate individuals speaking up about this and doing something about this. And the scam here is so-called chronic wasting disease, or CWD. This is a fake disease that's said to be transmissible by prions, which have never been proven to exist. They say this disease is fatal, which has never been proven. They determine this disease by testing, which has never been proven to be accurate. Governments, especially in the US, spend millions upon millions of dollars doing this testing, and their only response, if they do find so-called positive CWD deer, is to kill them. If any deer on a deer farm is found to be positive, then that farm is effectively shut down. It's no longer able to operate. And this has ended many businesses where people farm deer for food and for hunting purposes. An entire industry has been created to monitor, test, and kill deer. And you might not care about the livelihood of a few deer farmer, but this same game plan has been used and can be used on other animals. They say CWD only affects deer. Well, they do the same thing when it comes to bird flus and stuff. We've seen them kill millions upon millions of chickens and ducks and geese. We've seen them kill millions of cows for mad cow disease, which is also fake. So this same blueprint can be used to shut down economies based around certain animals. This can affect not just the farmers, also the consumers. So the CWD thing is a huge problem, not just for hunters, also for farmers, also for consumers of deer meat, and potentially also for farmers and consumers and hunters of other animals, because they could use this exact same narrative to target other animals and create new government agencies and new government industries on tracking, testing, and killing different animals. And one of the worst parts about this whole thing is that this is supposedly for the deer's own good, and then for your own good. You know, we're killing the deer so that they don't die, and we're stopping you from farming or hunting or eating deer for your own health. Of course, we all believe the government has our best interests at heart. Well, we're going to talk about all of this. I've made one episode before talking about this with my friend Dusty Backer, who is also here today. It's called Fake Deer Diseases and Other Fake Animal Diseases. I encourage you to check that out. Many people did not check that out. They didn't think it affected them. Whereas the government wasting your money in other ways would probably upset you, and you'd probably want to do something about it, at least see that the problem be stopped. Well, in this case, like I said, a lot of people don't care because it's deer, but you should care, and we're going to talk about why. And maybe by the end of this, you'll have a new appreciation for this and want to do something about it as well. I think since it is in deer, this is one of the reasons that they've been able to get away with this for so long. They've been able to kill deer, do weird Frankenstein experiments on deer, and just keep raking in government money for this because nobody's paying attention to it. There are other things going on. There are human disease scams and other animal disease scams as well, but this one I think has been largely swept under the rug because we have so much other things in the news cycle and so many other wasted government programs that people are upset about. Well, you should be upset about this one too. So I'll introduce the round table here. Join with me today is my friend once again, Dusty Backer. He is a beekeeper, but he's also an avid outdoorsman, deer hunter, deer watcher, deer feeder, deer lover, and he's become very educated about this problem and been very involved with trying to stop it, trying to stop the government from killing deer needlessly and spreading fake science about a fake disease that doesn't exist. And he's been doing a good job at that so far. We're going to catch back up with him in a second. We're also joined by Jan Asliger, a deer farmer in Wisconsin, David Strickland, who's worked for several agencies and realized how corrupt they are. He lives in South Carolina. And we're also joined by Jay Gregory. He's from Iowa. He's a sportsman, and he has a TV show, and he actually has a large following himself. So I'm very happy that all you guys could join me today. Really, I'm just the host here. I want to pass it right on to you guys. Where do you think we should start with this? Dusty and I talked about, the history of this, where it came from, and how just one basic document has been carried through to justify all these new agencies and new programs to kill a bunch of deer. But what do you guys have to say about this on how this all started and how we got here?
Like I'll just start with an introduction, Ryan, because you kind of know where we stand. But as far as the people like are gonna watch this video, there's been so much research and behind the scenes and working with these agencies to prove that it's contagious and have them show us that it's contagious and show us that the prion exists. And all we ever get is a 2021 research paper that prion is supposed to be an electron microscope of a prion, and we all know it's graphics. And the few slides that are in this paper are actually five fibrils at 81,000 magnification. And Dr. Wallach used an electron microscope of 126,000 magnification and could see the double helix, the two molecule strands, and has never seen a prion. A prion, that's why it doesn't exist. Dr. Wallach's right, and he says this is all made up, and that's exactly what it is. And that's why even in the AFWA document that these agencies follow, the nonprofit, but the agencies, there's 30 contributors to the AFWA document, and they wrote their own criteria and picked their own peer-reviewed science. There's 30 contributors who wrote this 111-page best management practices. And one name is there's Kristen Schuler from Cornell University. And she also has a paper that's the prion hypothesis, the examination of the evidence. So after there's been over $1 billion spent after 57 years, and it's still the prion hypothesis. So what have these tests been picking up the last 30 years when the prion's never been seen under a microscope? That's why when you call it as the scam, a made up scam that doesn't exist, CWD, the narrative doesn't exist. But does the neurodegenerative disease really exist? Yes, but it's really rare. Majority of the animals don't have the neurodegenerative disease. And when you ask the agencies for contagious, all they have is inoculation studies, which doesn't prove natural transmission whatsoever. I mean, it's just hypocrisy, hypocrisy, hypocrisy. 57 years later, billions of dollars spent, and here we are fighting to save the deer, save the wildlife, help the individuals. And David could probably go more about the corruption and stuff as he's worked for the agencies.
Well, let me unpack this just a little bit and explain it just a little bit. So you said a lot there. So apparently, we can see DNA on an electron microscope. And DNA is really small, but an electron microscope is really powerful. The prion is supposed to be a contagious particle, sort of kind of like a virus that they've been trying to connect to a bunch of different diseases for a long time. The first one was probably Kuru, which they said was responsible for cannibalism in Papua New Guinea, which was proven to be a hoax before that. Basically, the researcher just kind of needed to justify what he was doing there and basically made it up. Showed pictures of so-called cannibals with human meat in their hands, and yet it was actually pork. And the Kuru disease kind of mysteriously just went away anyway. So we don't really know the whole scene of what actually was happening there, but Kuru was a hoax. And people still talk about Kuru as if it's a real thing. And that is the justification for all of these following prion diseases, including mad cow disease, right? CJD, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's all the same thing, mad cow disease. Scrapie in sheep or scrappy. And could even be other ones as well. You know, they try to blame some cases of MS and other, weird neurological diseases in humans. They say, oh, well, that might be a prion. And I think one of the reasons they say this is because the prion theory gave them this long virus thing, right? This long resting period before the person or the animal actually gets sick. So it allowed them to make up a whole bunch of diseases with all these random times that it takes to actually affect you. So you get so-called infected, and then years or decades later, you might actually get sick. They use this with AIDS as well. They say, oh, there's this long latency period. So you get infected, but you might not have a problem for 20 years or something. You better start on drugs right away. And then, of course, once you start on the drugs, you start to get worse. And now they blame that. Oh, there you go. That's proof that you have a disease. So, yeah, this whole thing is fake from the beginning because prions have never even been proven to exist, as you just said. If you look up prions, pictures of prions on Google, you get a bunch of computer graphics and drawings and stuff. Whereas we can see things that are supposedly smaller than that, such as DNA, with electron microscopes. And it's very likely that whatever they're calling a prion is just junk. It's just debris. There's all kinds of debris in our body They haven't even proved viruses to truly exist either. But prions are even more mysterious, again, mostly because of this long latency period and sort of random effects. And you were mentioning injection studies. This is kind of the last thing that I think we should clarify. That they're saying, oh, we've proven these things are transmissible. Well, how do they prove it? They take brains of an animal, blend it, inject those brains into another brain, another animal, and if the animal gets sick, which it usually doesn't, if the animal gets sick, they say that's proof of transmission. Meanwhile, even if there was a virus that was transmitted or a bacteria or something, that's not a natural circumstance. That's not how you catch a cold. You don't inject brain material into your brain by any means. So to claim that as true as proof of transmission is absurd, and yet most people just don't read between the lines because they don't say that in their news releases. They say we've proven transmission. They don't say how. And a lot of people are wise to this now when it comes to AIDS and other virus things where, they fully have failed to actually prove it, yet they're not putting two and two together that this is also how they're creating all these fake pandemics in animals and justifying multi-million and billion-dollar budgets to go and kill animals and experiment on animals for these fake diseases.
And to add to that, Ryan, about the inoculations, majority of them are synthetic, like gain of function research. Like it's in their own documents. I mean, there's a Creighton University prion biologist who's been doing it for 25 years, and he makes synthetic prions. Like that's gain of function research and then jamming fake prion. How do you know what a fake prion or a synthetic prion would look like when a prion's never been seen under the microscope? How do you know the tests are picking up a prion when they've never been seen? Stanley Prusner coined the word prion in 1982 and has no pictures of a prion. And isn't Prusner the one behind Kuru?
I don't know if you guys have seen this piece that's been put out. The Missouri Department of Conservation vendor payments, fiscal year ending in June 30th. This is fiscal years and monies that were donated to certain entities that in turn would support the CWD cause. And in my evaluation of just guessing would be that they're basically, what that means is they're paying their lobbyists to go in front of whoever makes the decisions and keep CWD alive. And the list from 2013 to 2025, I'll back up. I'll start with 2025. I don't know that this is true, but this has been circulated, and I'm sure somebody could confirm this or not, but you can't get the MDC to confirm it. They made a payment to the National Deer Association from 21 to 25, 128,000 this year, 120,000 last year, 120,000 the year before that, 20,000 before that, 160,000 before that. And then it goes into the quality deer management group. And those numbers are basically the same: 160, 110, 119, 110, 125, 82, 50, 50, and 48. So why would they be paying why would the MDC be paying those amounts of money to those, to those entities? I mean,
because all the organizations are, other than Hunter Nation, there's very few organizations out there that aren't behind the CWD narrative. And all of it goes back to the AFWA document, the Associations of Fish and Wildlife Agency document, which is actually a nonprofit. It's not even the agency, but all the 50 states are tied to this document. And it's 111 pages, and it's all about CWD. It's called the Best Management Practices. That's what's pushing this whole narrative across the nation. And there's businesses tied to it, Cabela's. Yeah, like you said, the National Deer Association, almost every group except for Hunter Nation is tied to that. Pheasants Forever.
The whole thing's insanity. I mean, it's all tied to money and who's getting kickbacks and who's, it's being funded, because there's not an argument out there that makes any of this. There's no common sense to any of it. Right. In the cheapest of layman's terms, let's go kill a deer to keep it from dying. Okay. Well, first of all, explain to us where in the country has any of this ever worked or made a difference. It's been all negative effects. Right. And what's happening now is it's mind blowing that they're continuing to do this, and they have there's no biology that says that this is the right thing to do. I mean, ask the poor people in Wisconsin and where this all kind of started, years ago. What happened to their deer herd? Here in Missouri, I mean, we've been fighting EHD every year, which is real, and we lose a lot of deer. And now the agency continues every day to go in and bait these places. And like I said before, they're getting pushback from obviously the general public, because now what you're seeing is that they're going into public areas, and there's pictures all over the internet. I mean, they're going in, they're putting big corn piles out and setting their blinds up and shooting deer. And I suppose they have to do that because they can't get landowners are starting to wise up to this. So now they're going to public areas, but they got to continue to kill those deer so that they're going to get their federal funding, or they can justify it so they can keep the money train rolling. It's disgusting. One of the things that I find interesting about this whole conversation is that if you look at the pamphlets that they put out through all the states now that they're trying to get funding and they're wiping out the deer herds, one of the things that stands out the most is in their propaganda, it says CWD is 100% fatal. Every brochure, every time they go to somebody's house, every time they go and they have one of these meetings, that's one of the first things they say. It's 100% fatal. Okay, so I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not a biologist. Okay, I'm just a dumb Southern Iowa guy that has been lucky enough to enjoy the outdoor industry for as long as I have. But I do know this: the CWD was found back in the 60s in Colorado, I believe. Okay, so it's been around for about 65 years. Okay, if it was transferable and if these prions were real, okay, assuming everything they're saying is completely true, it's 100% fatal. It is passed by deer give it to each other all the time. So obviously you can't have minerals out, because we can't have them having minerals, licking minerals out of the ground in the same spot. We can't have them. We can't have them over feeders. We can't have them doing any of this stuff because it's 100% fatal. And it's okay. So that has started in the 60s. Where are the mass die-offs of all of these deer for all of these years? And all the money that's been spent to go into states like Wisconsin and now Missouri. I mean, it's spread all over the place. Tennessee, Arkansas, Illinois, all these places. With today's technology, you're going to tell me that every landowner has cameras all over their property. They manage, they name their deer. They know everything about their deer, about their property. They walk the property. They shed hunt. They look for deadheads. They look for EHD deer that have died. Where are all the dead deer? Which that right there in itself tells you that this is complete BS. Because if what they had said would even have a little bit of truth to it, there would be mass die-offs of deer everywhere. Instead, what we get is the propaganda of, well, we're going to go kill the deer to keep them from dying. Well, that doesn't make any sense to anyone who has a rational mind whatsoever. And everywhere that they've initiated this pamphlet that they basically have this blueprint. If you do this, and this, and follow our script, you're going to get federal funding. And that's basically what every state does. Because if you look, every state has basically the same exact blueprint that they follow. And when you try and argue with them, they give you it's like they're reading from a pamphlet, which is just such a joke. It's like there's no common sense whatsoever. And it's like I said earlier, at first you think, well, they're just stupid. But they're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. No human being could be that stupid to think that we're going to kill deer to keep deer from dying. It's all about the money. Now, where that money's coming from, what lobbyists, are insurance companies at fault in this too? Where is the corruption coming from? There's a lot of evil there, no doubt in my mind. But bottom line is, if you use common sense, none of this makes any sense whatsoever. Zero.
And just to add to what Jay was saying, like this whole media-driven, they're pushing out the narrative is biting them in the ass, so to speak, because they keep saying highly contagious, always fatal. And people look around like, well, there shouldn't be any deer left. And to go back with me, I have a game farm, and it wasn't 6 months after I bought the property. They'd been doing all their testing and everything. Everything's been negative. But the second I buy it, they find a positive. But it was a natural born animal on the property. So I said, okay, so where did it come from? It had to come from nature. It didn't come from the animals that I brought in. It didn't come from the animals that were brought in for that hunting season because they've all been killed. They've tested negative. So where did it come from? And then they come back and say, well, it came from contaminated feed. And I said, is that right? So I said, I have a biosecurity on my property. I can't sell feed. I can't move equipment. I can't move live animals. Any vehicle that comes and goes, any of my clients, they have to get this, wash their boots, their clothes with 200 parts per million chlorine. So I said, oh, so 200 parts per million chlorine, that's very specific. So I said, I have a friend down in Oshkosh. I said, I can load up a plane full of 200 parts per million chlorine. I'll spray my property. It's done. We don't have to deal with it anymore. But I asked, Paul McGraw was the head of DATCAP at the time. So I said, my biosecurity, this is what it states. I can't move livestock. I can't move machinery. I can't sell feed. Is that correct? And he says, that's correct. You cannot do that. You're under quarantine. I said, so what's the biosecurity for the farmers down in Lodi where this endemic started? And he goes, well, that's different. Those are wild deer. And I said, no, they're farmers under your jurisdiction, and CWD is CWD. What is the biosecurity for them moving their equipment to and from their land, selling feed, moving livestock, and driving into town? CWD is CWD. If it's highly contagious and always fatal, what is theirs? Why is it just specific to me? Would not answer the question. And then I asked him, I said, who from your department came to my property, took soil samples, and what did they find? Because I said, you've quarantined my land. So you've devalued my land. My land is worthless now because of some made up disease. So who from your, well, we just assumed. So I said, you've slandered my business. You've ruined my business on an assumption. And they just did not want to answer it. And every time they have a test come back that's positive, and I ask them, what did it test positive for? You say it tested positive, but what did it test positive for? Because you still have yet to identify the infecting agent of CWD. Give us what it is. I've asked, show it to me. What does a prion look like? Show me a self-replicating one, because for something to be highly contagious, it's got to be self-replicating. It's got to be viral, bacterial, fungal. It's got to be something. And then on top of that, what path did it take from the brain to get outside the brain? Because to my knowledge, CWD has never been found outside of the brain. So saying that an animal has never died from CWD is 100% accurate, because every animal, it has to have a necropsy to find this extremely rare brain condition, which New Zealand is the only country I know that has taken the right steps to do that. We used to sell deer and elk into New Zealand back in the early 70s. They were crossbreeding elk and red deer for venison and antler growth, just to try and beef up the size and speed it up a bit, and they ran into it there. But they treated it for exactly what it was. It's an extremely rare brain condition because animals weren't getting it, they were dying from it, and they put it as a mineral deficiency and stress, which was causing the myelin sheath to break down. They were treating animals with double doses of copper, and other people were saying, for the amount of copper that you're giving them, you're going to kill them. And they said, well, they're going to die anyway. The ones that they treated with double doses of copper were the only ones that lived. They reversed back and they were doing fine. But the thing that New Zealand has is they don't have DNR. They don't have that agency. Private landowners own everything on the land. The wildlife, the trees, the minerals, everything. If it's not on your land, it's no longer yours. And it took that country to go broke, where they went through and just said, like, okay, we need to cut some agencies here. Why do we have Fish and Wildlife? We have police. What is your job? What are you doing? And who looks after animals better than the private landowner? So they basically got rid of Fish and Wildlife. So in New Zealand, they have the best hunting industry in the world, as far as I can see. They don't have an endemic problem. They're not losing animals. They have more deer inside and outside the fence than anywhere in the world. And they don't have a problem because they treated it for what it was. But 54% of New Zealand is privately owned. The rest is outsourced land that's owned by companies. It's forestry and stuff like that. So in New Zealand, there is no bag limits. There's no hunting seasons. You can hunt 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. There's no license or anything like that. You need permission from the landowner, because who looks after the land and the animals better than the person that owns the land? And you look at the state of the U.S. right now, that's kind of where we're at. with Doge, we need to start going and cutting agencies that don't need to be there. So they said, why do we need game wardens that have badges and guns? We already have police. So the only thing that you can really get charged with in New Zealand is trespassing. And wasting is the other one but every man and their dog in New Zealand hunts. So going out, there's no such thing as poaching, because why shoot it? If you shoot it, take it home. It's not illegal. You can take it right to a restaurant. You can sell the venison. You can catch the animals live. You can sell them to a game farm. You can buy animals from a game farm, put them on your land and release them. It's just common sense. And I don't know why we can't do the same things here. If you have animals in your land, you should be able to manage them exactly the way anybody else would do it, inside or outside of a fence, because that's how I manage my land. It's 800 acres, but my fence is to keep predators and just jealous people out, because government's not going to do it for me. They don't have a clue.
Jen, I think you answered your own question. Why aren't we allowed to do this in the United States, or in Canada for that matter? The reason is because these agencies need to justify their own existence.
Exactly.
They need to have a job, and it's self-perpetuating. And what you have described here is endemic in all government agencies. Nobody has responsibility. Nobody has to take responsibility. Hey, you, why are you on my land? Why are you detaining me? Why are you doing that? I'm just doing my job. Everyone's just doing their job. And you try and put your inquiry higher up the ladder, you get a bunch of that. Oh, I'm just doing my job, talk to the next guy. I'm just doing my job, talk to the next guy. You get to the head of the ladder and they just ignore you. Right? Anyone who's ever tried to deal with any government agency, that's what you get. Nobody's responsible. No one's taking responsibility. The agencies have created their own justification for existing based on faulty documents, faulty evidence, lobbying, and all this stuff. And it just keeps perpetuating itself. As long as they spend their budget, they can apply for another budget. They get more budget. They keep going. They keep doing whatever it is that they do. Even if it's a useless activity like tagging animals or culling animals or whatever it is, it's already in their mandate, and no individual in that system has responsibility for it. So we can complain all we want to the individuals. They're just doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And that's why we have all these regulations, because all these people have created their own jobs, and they do need to be cut.
Yep.
And David, you can
Let me
Policy.
I'd like to hear David, since he's worked for these agencies. I'd love to hear what he has to say about the corruptness of it.
Right. Let me go ahead and fill in. So, guys, my name's David Strickland. I literally was hunting at the age of 4. Dad was carrying me before that in a papoose backpack. I'm now about to be 55. My whole life has been dedicated to the study of wildlife, and I'm talking about down to the molecular levels. I'm the guy that had the scholarship for med school that turned that into, animal behavior and genetics and pathology, physiology. Dropped straight out of college with the whole mindset that that's what I was going to do, spend the rest of my life working for a government agency, making a difference somehow in the world of conservation, mainly addressed to the hunting aspect of everything. So I did a lot of work with the United States Forest Service through college, and I was what they call a biologist tech. And so I'd been raised in a family that was extremely honest, extremely transparent, and I immediately started picking up on some things that were going against the grain of the meritocracy. Hire the person best for the job. The person with the most knowledge gets the job right off the rip. And this was in the 80s, which is, and some of this stuff that I'm going to say, somebody could pin me as racist for, misogynist for. I'm to the point where I don't care. I'm 100% merit-based. But I watched people that shouldn't be hired. I'll call those like Farmer John's sons and daughters that had gone to college and who knew the subject matter intensely, especially for their age, get passed over for someone that was the opposite end of the spectrum from what should have been in that position. I got my position because I would like to believe I was extremely hardworking. I stayed out of the mess of the politics in it, kept my nose down, started going. But as that kept on moving forward, the stink got more and more. So I literally had a big position lined up with the Forest Service. At the age of 22 years old, was going to get a whole project head, and it was a project based on the intensity of firing versus the restoration and recruitment of hardwoods versus pines. So we don't need to go into all that. But it was a pretty prominent research project at the time. I didn't get the job at the very last second because another person that was more flavored to the affirmative action program came in. That was my first kick in the shins. I wound up going to work for the Department of Natural Resources. I'm here in the state of South Carolina, also as a biologist. And I got promoted, hardworking, and I took over a really large project, very important to human health, and also tied to the tourist industry here in Charleston. And did a lot of fisheries research. But the key thing that literally made me go, what in the world, is when I found, and some of you guys are old enough to remember, along on the East Coast, there was a toxic algae called Pfisteria piscicida. It was killing people, especially crabbers along the East Coast that were dealing with it. And so they set up a whole research lab. Well, the lead research lab was the Moat Marine Lab. That researcher actually died. And she died because she was growing this stuff. And the filtration system was pumping it back to her office. It literally killed her. So a big funding movement came to study Pfisteria. Well, I found it, sent it off, literally verified that it occurred here in Charleston Harbor. And within days, my funding was yanked out from under me. And I was like, what in the world? This is hugely important. So the stink again began to rise. And I was ready to leave the department at that time, but then the law enforcement agency recruited me because I got my captain's license at a young age. I got into the law enforcement agency. That's when I really saw the real stink. And most of the conservation officers, i.e. game wardens that I worked with, were good people. But there was a whole segment of people that considered, even within the Department of Natural Resources, they considered the hunter the enemy, not the source of their income, not the source of their funding, but literally the enemy. And that was taught to us. And I didn't realize what had been pushed into my brain until I got so fed up with it, moved out. So a lot of this will explain something to you guys. A lot of the agents that you talk with, they do not know that they are a part of I'm just going to say it like I believe it, a corrupt organization, because their heart has been truly swayed towards that cause. So if you tell a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old over and over again that an elephant is a cow, by the time they're 14 years old, you're going to have a hard time getting that 14-year-old to believe that a cow's a cow and an elephant's an elephant. So that's the process. And you have these people like myself who came in at a young age. I started working for the U.S. Forest Service like at the age of 20. I didn't get out of government agency until like the age of like 32. And it was like these blinders were lifted because I'd always felt something, but I knew better than to speak out. I knew very much better. I tried speaking out once or twice and was pushed into the corner and told to hush. So it's step in line or get out. Some of the things that I saw funding wise were just absolutely atrocious, both on the biological side and on the law enforcement side. Essentials were ignored. Non-essentials were embraced. And this goes back to the gentleman that just spoke. The government has become its own entity. It's full of their own subdivisions, their own televisions, their entire society and economy is like this never-ending cyclone of absorption. And in that, they pull people into it and build entire industries, entire agencies. So the government functions off of bloat. In the case of CWD, the reason that we are all sitting here going, I can't believe this, is because our minds work logically. These people that you're dealing with, their minds do not work logically till you get to some of the upper tier guys. They know what's going on. They will never admit that they know what's going on because their mortgage, their insurance, their kids' college funds, their new car, their medical bills and everything depends on that narrative. And here's why. And Dusty and I've talked about this, and some of you guys may have brought it up already. I had to walk into a construction site and missed you. A lot of you guys can remember back, there was a massive multi-billion-dollar funding program done through APHIS, USDA, for the feral hog research. Everybody remember that? It ended. That's when CWD came to the forefront. All your university labs, your researchers, your I'll call them your fund black holes, the people that take this funding, all of a sudden they were like, oh my God, that money's gone. CWD was just the scapegoat for that. And they're going to hold on to that narrative until it's disproven. Now, the pathology of CWD is completely invented, short of what we all know. And that's to prove it, you got to have a necropsy. The physiology of CWD is completely invented. There's very few things that I don't know about the physiology of a white-tailed deer or a wild turkey or a bobwhite quail or waterfowl for that matter. And the bottom line, and in humans, the bottom line is they keep the narrative is it's a prion. Well, as Dusty and everybody else has said, well, we don't even, prion's still a hypothesis. The easy way to yank that one out from under there is no, there's no.
So David got cut off there a little bit. He's in the car. That's okay. He'll be back in a second. So that's interesting. I never heard that before with this wild hog research. Any of you guys know anything about that? What were they doing with the wild hogs? And before I pass it to you guys, this reminds me a lot of the virus hunters before AIDS, because previously, before the AIDS epidemic was invented, they were all busy looking for the virus that caused cancer. And when that started to become public that it was a failure, they were just wasting millions and millions of dollars for years and decades and not getting anywhere. The virus hunters seem to have panicked. The whole industry seemed to have panicked and say, well, we need a new virus to hunt, right? And when the AIDS pandemic was declared, they all jumped ship onto the AIDS and they continued justifying their career that way. He said something very interesting. He equated government agency with industry. I think that's very, very important here because any one of these agencies that is created, they create themselves an industry. So it's weird to think about, but this whole thing is an industry. Killing deer randomly for a disease that doesn't exist is in fact an industry that only exists because of government waste and lack of general awareness about this, I guess. What do you guys know about this hog thing?
Jay, do you know anything about the feral hog thing? I know down south that was a big thing.
I really don't. I don't know much about the hog thing at all. I didn't really get into any of this. I try to just stay away from government and politics and all that stuff until the CWD thing. Obviously, being in the industry I'm in, it was just shocking. And speaking of my industry, it's also very shocking to me that the very people that have made a living off of our industry and off of deer hunting and off of everything that is the outdoors over the years, there's so many people with so huge platforms out there that have chosen to either not use them at all and just bite their lip, or they've even used them to promote CWD, which just blows my mind, and it's just like, I've probably been one of the black sheep of the industry because from the get-go, I don't care what anyone thinks about. I mean, I know what's right and what's wrong, and this whole thing is wrong. I mean, it's just, you do not have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that there is, it's evil. It's what it is. That's the best. I've had people ask me, well, how do you describe what's going on with these agencies? And it's just pure evil. I mean, there's no excuse for it. Like I said before, it's not like they're stupid. It's not like they don't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're going to continue to do it until we get them out of power. And I don't know exactly the way to do that, but I wish we had an Elon Musk, quote unquote, that was checking their numbers and what they're doing, because what they're doing is just so wrong.
Jay, when you say your industry, you mean the outdoor industry in general, sportsmen?
Yeah, that's just the outdoor industry. I mean, obviously, I've been in. I'm in my 34th year of the TV show, so I've been around for a while, and I've seen a lot of things change over the years, and it's just I remember the first time I really started hearing about CWD was whenever they started killing them off. I had some friends who owned some ground in Buffalo County or close to Buffalo County in Wisconsin. And they were telling me these horror stories about they were coming in and just wiping the deer out, shooting them at night, shooting them over corn piles and doing all this. And I was like, I didn't understand it. And when you first heard about it, you thought, wow, this must be, our deer herd must be really in jeopardy here. And then that's been years and years ago. And we're still, they're still doing it. And obviously it's good business to kill deer to keep them from dying. That's about the only explanation you can come up with. It's sick.
That's why it's not even insanity anymore, Jay. It's actually criminal because 57 years later, and they're still, slaughtering tens of thousands of deer, and they're doing the same thing. You can't even call that insanity.
Yeah, exactly.
They need to be held accountable.
It's pure criminal is exactly what it is. And I think all these agencies, I wish there was some way that somebody was smart enough out there. I wish there was some way to file a class action lawsuit against every one of these agencies that's pulled this crap for all these years, because it's all been a total lie. It's just, I know I get messages and emails from landowners all over the country all the time that follow the show that'll email me and have told me stories about their farms are ruined, the neighbors that, and it's not hunters that are doing this so much as it is, you've got people, maybe that are landowners that don't really know anything. It's not, you don't really blame them. Like I know, for instance, there's been some landowners around me that the agencies have went in and sat down at their kitchen table and they play this game of this gray area of, well, we don't know if it'll transfer to your dogs or your cattle or if it'll make the jump to humans. There's always this gray area that they try and scare the crap out of them. And of course, they're older people. They don't know anything about CWD. They've seen and heard this zombie disease. Well, they don't want to die from it. They've just created this whole narrative that everything is on fear. It's all a scare tactic, and it's made them millions to keep this fiasco going. And it's, to your word, it's criminal. As far as I'm concerned, it's just criminal.
Guys, sorry about that. My phone overheated. I guess we were getting too close to the truth. So I wanted to just start real quick where I was, and I won't draw it all out. So the causative agent of CWD could not be a prion. A prion, as they hypothesize, is a folded protein, which is an abnormal protein. The causative agent, which you can pull the rug right out from under them, is what causes, which I don't believe happens, knowing the pathology that I do, the protein to fold. That would be the causative agent. And that, secondly to that, if anybody knows anything about pathology in any type of mammalian species, there's two different types. You have the frequency dependent and density dependent. They're treating CWD as if it's a density dependent when it's absolutely not density dependent. It's a frequency dependent disease. I won't go into those two things.
Well, it's worth explaining just a little bit, right? So you're saying that in some cases, crowding animals together can cause more disease, but that's not what this is.
Yes, no, it's absolutely not what this is. We know that just from constitutional evidence that CWD was first discovered in the wild herd in, circa 2001. So they say in Nebraska, Wisconsin, South Dakota. If you follow the population trends, the dynamics of a density-dependent disease means that it absolutely flows through the herd based on the density of the animals, i.e. humans and the flu or measles or smallpox. The proximity of the jump matters in density dependent. It does not matter in frequency dependent. Frequency dependent means, let's say a water fountain is contaminated, there's a disease in it, but I got to go drink out of that fountain 4 or 5 different times to get it. Whereas a density orientation would mean somebody drank out of the contaminated fountain and it spread through the population very quick because we're all packed together. So they're trying to treat CWD as a density-dependent disease. That's their protocol. That's what they're using as the blanket to cover up the criminality of destroying the deer herd when it's absolutely a frequency-driven disease, if even a disease. I'm of the firm 100%, both physiological and pathology orientation, diagnosis, protocols, and et cetera, that it is neither. And that, primitive man was eating CWD deer after or before some events on the habitat side of things created an era of, it could have been during the ice age. They didn't have enough mast, i.e. acorns, soft mast, i.e. berries, to produce the lipids that they needed, the cholesterols that they needed. And so you wound up with disease like TSE, in the same as we have in Creutzfeldt-Jacobs and, Alzheimer's and et cetera. Back to the criminality of it, guys, we cannot rationalize criminality because we are not criminals. Jay nailed it. The only way that we're going to get this, hopefully, is through, a discovery of like, oh my God, this stinks so much that somebody somehow organizes. And I've said, and I've told Dusty from the beginning, I've been semi-blessed. I've got enough money to help pay for attorneys. And I've sent some to the guys down there in Texas for it. But that's what it's going to take, is suing these departments. The last thing I want to add on that, guys, is that having worked in those departments, it's hard for many people to believe that those departments could be corrupt because, especially the older generation, like my father and my grandfather, because at that time those agencies were not corrupt. They were full of people who genuinely, number one, they were hunters and fishermen. Number two, they were legitimate scientists. And number three, they were a part of an American fabric and the thread and the culture of what was America, versus if you live in an insulated circle, as many of us do, we don't see how bad it's gotten. I've been battling the Forest Service and the Department of Natural Resources for going on 7 years for corruption in my state. And I'm talking about tracing, $13 million from my state getting paid to Ducks Unlimited for a $100,000 pump. And nothing comes out of it because the legislature is all tied into it. The hands are deep into the pockets. But that's about what I have. If anybody wants to go into anything deeper on that side of things, just let me know.
Here's how simple I am. Here's how I think you get rid of CWD. You quit testing for it.
Bingo.
It's over.
Talking about it
doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
I don't care how many deer they test, how many deer they say have got CWD. It doesn't matter. There's about how many more diseases are there out there that deer have they don't even have a name for. I mean, CWD is it's nothing more than a money train scam at this point. That's the only way they're going to get rid of it, is quit testing it. And I've told all my friends and everybody that I can ever reach out to, do not have your deer tested, because if you
absolutely
test them and they come in, then they got a license to come in and try and wipe out your neighbor's deer herd or get as close to you as they can. I mean, so what? A deer's got CWD. That doesn't mean anything. How many of us have eaten hundreds of pounds of CWD, supposed CWD infected deer over the years since the 1970s? I mean, and has it ever affected one human being? No. Can they even document that one deer's ever died of CWD? No. I mean, it's all BS.
Well, when you have to get, you're exactly right, Jay. When you have to get funds for human dimensions, it's right out of their best management practices, page 87. Human dimensions to convince us and how deadly and contagious this disease is, when after 57 years later, you're doing the same thing and you can't show us the causative agent. And what have these tests been picking up? I mean, human dimensions, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars have been spent for pamphlets and billboards. And I mean, it's just, it's got scam written all over it.
Jay was talking about, like, a class action lawsuit should be done. It'd be nice to hold somebody accountable for this. And it was done in Canada. It was the Holland case where the game farmers sued the Saskatchewan government. And basically they were found negligent. They were found guilty, the government, of destroying and ruining an industry worth billions of dollars. They were ordered to pay indemnities back to the game farmers and anybody that was affected to it. And they would appeal it. And at the next level, they were found guilty again, because basically the judge stated, like, you have no evidence. Like, you keep making the claims of this supposed disease, but where's your physical evidence? Like, show us what you've done. And my father signed on to the class action lawsuit. That's when the government kind of came after us. And we proved it right there. You killed over 800 elk on our property, and not one of them came back positive. There was one suspect animal. She showed the symptoms because she was old. She was 18 years old. but she was one of the original breeding cows, and Dad says, I'm not gonna shoot her. She can die on her own free will. We'll keep her happy and everything. But that was their suspect animal. She wasn't clinical. She was just suspect. And meanwhile, when the government just kept appealing it, they changed how things work to where they wrote it in there that bureaucrats can't be held accountable for their actions. So it made it right to the Supreme Court. They fought it. And the judge, who is basically works for the government, basically said, well, we're going to throw it out because bureaucrats can't be held accountable for their actions. And the lawyer that was on behalf of us said, like, it's illegal what they've done. You can't change the rules as you go along to benefit you because you've been found guilty. But we didn't have the money to go further. Like, the government absolutely broke the industry. So there we sat. And like they said, we could fight this, we could win it, but there was just no more funds. They absolutely drained everybody. So that's where that ended.
And you guys got no compensation, right?
No, well, we got compensation. It was like 10 cents on the dollar. And then they put us under quarantine. And then when it came back that we didn't have any positives on our farm, not one clinical positive, but we kept asking the question, you keep saying positive, a positive what? You still haven't identified what the causative agent is. You haven't shown us what a prion is or what causes a protein to misfold. So there is no infecting agent. So when you have a test, what are you testing positive for? And that's exactly what's going on here. I keep asking the same question. I send in samples. I'm paying for something that I did not request, so I'm getting screwed over. But I keep asking them, like, okay, you say a positive for what? Show me what the positive, what tested positive. If it's a prion, show me a prion.
Your suggestion is I've had friends that have been in the industry you're in, and I feel for you guys having to go through what you went through and to have your livelihood taken away from you. What I think would be a great outcome for us as just outdoorsmen all across the country isn't for an agency to have to pay us anything. It's for us to just be able to say, stop.
Exactly.
Alone. Let Mother Nature take care of itself and go away and quit killing off. My kids may not have deer to hunt one of these days if they continue this the way it's going, because and I don't understand it. I thought the conservation agencies worked for us and were on our side. It's almost like they don't want anything to do with the hunter, the outdoorsman. They don't care about our deer herd. They don't care about our resource. They get all the money from our licenses, and they get, in Missouri, they get a 1% of the sales tax. I mean, they're one of the richest conservation departments in the country, if not the richest. Yet it seems like they're against us. I just don't understand why they would want to wipe out our deer herds. It makes no sense. We just want them to stop, go away, go climb back in your hole, find something else to do, but leave our deer alone.
Well, yeah. David said it. David said that within the agencies, the hunter is the enemy.
Absolutely. So what has transpired, and I don't think it's happened, I've elk hunted all over the West and duck hunted all over the Southwest. I've been to Africa. I've been, I've done a lot of hunting. The driving factor here was affirmative action that changed the atmosphere of the agencies from Farmer John, son and daughter getting that position to, Enrique or someone not of the original. And this is, I guess you got to say, it's kind of like a racist comment, but they started bringing in the DEI type hires, more women, more people of color that were not raised in the hunting, farming culture and community. What happened then was a shift from what we call hook and bullet to warm and fuzzy. And warm and fuzzy being more like the natural resources and or game departments, became more based on bird watching, bicycle riding, hiking than hunting and fishing. And that transition really started occurring in the mid 80s, but it ramped up hard in the early 90s. From there, you had an infiltration of people who don't like hunters. They don't see, no matter how much you try to teach them about the conservation of hunting and what it does for the population, they don't get it. You had the people that come in, the wolf lovers, the coyote lovers, the cougar lovers, you know, and that pushed guys like me into a corner. And it was either get in line or get out. But to your question, Jay, when you say you don't understand it, so having my experience with the agencies and my schooling that I have, and I guess just knowing a whole lot of people in my general area, a lot of people started pushing me when our agencies in this general area started moving away from traditional and practical and productive wild game management policies and protocols. And so I founded a group called the Carolina Wildlife Syndicate. We're all about proper management for the game species. And in that, what I discovered was, I had to sit in front of the legislature multiple times. I've been on the Senate floor, the House floor, all about like budget money. Where's it at? Why aren't we seeing any type of increases in our turkey population? Why are our deer populations dropping down? You increased our deer tag stamp for coyote research, but you're not doing anything about the coyotes. We're losing 70% of our annual fawn crop to coyotes here in the state of South Carolina because our deer are not adapted to coyotes, and they're messing up our turkeys and everything else. So what I found was a massive anti-hunting segment of the game agency employment. The biologist for the Francis Marion National Forest, which is 270,000 acres that sits just north of Charleston, literally told me when I was expressing concern about the condition of the food plots on our national forest, he was like, he literally said to me, you just want those hunters to have honey holes. I don't want them to have honey holes. And I was like, oh my God, that means you don't want them to kill animals and feed their families. And he balked as soon as I said that. I said, Justin, you're an anti-hunter. And he was like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, yeah, you are. So that whole entire thing changed. So Jay, to your point, here's why they want to get rid of deer hunting. If you look at the human population algorithm for the next 50 years, there will be no way that we can hold on to all of our public lands. There's going to have to be people for room for them to go. They know this. They see it. They're planning for it. Secondly, they don't want the Second Amendment any longer. You destroy deer hunting, you destroy the support for the Second Amendment. So it's about, we are preparing ourselves for an overpopulated planet Earth where we have to control the unruly masses via food and via taking away weapons. That's the tinfoil hat solution that I've come up with. I can't get away from it because I know these people sitting at the tops of these food chains came from the old school biologists. The heads of these departments, they were once old school. Some of them are new, but they know what they're doing, and they're probably being told to do it or else lose their job. I'm dealing with one of the nation's leading waterfowl biologists right now, and he is calling me a fascist, calling Trump a fascist and everything else, and he's lost some of his researchers and everything else. But yet there's this big piece of information that says that pen-raised mallards, i.e. released mallards, are destroying the genetic code of the wild mallard population. They will be threatened in my lifetime. He will not rise up and speak against it because he's so tied to his money. And another thing we hadn't touched on, these people gain a celebrity status. Some of these biologists, some of these people, the director of wildlife agencies, game agents, they gain power and a celebrity status. And when a person has that, they're one of two things. They can do really good with it, like a guy like Nuge, yourself, Jay, or they can do really bad with it, as we've seen. All right, I'll close on that.
I'd like to jump in for just a moment here because I'm the odd man out here. I grew up in a city, and I was at one point very liberal, and I was taken into this ideology that, no, we shouldn't kill animals. I even became a vegan at one point. And it was by becoming vegan that I learned how important animal foods were. At 22 years old, I was losing my hair, and my hair was turning gray and stuff. I looked like an old man at 22 years old. And all I had to do was add chicken eggs back into my diet, and my hair started coming back, and it stopped going gray immediately. And I immediately felt better. And years later, when I got into the health business, I had the privilege of helping many people try meat for the first time after years and watch them. Sometimes I'm there in person with them saying, just have a steak, it's okay. And watch them saying, wow, that feels amazing. It is integral, it's crucial for our health. We must. We are omnivores. Vegetables are important too. Garlic is amazing, all this stuff. But we absolutely require animal foods, first of all. So there's not only this huge anti-hunter push, especially from people who live in cities, which is most people, but also anti-meat push. And we've seen a little bit of a switch in the industry now. You know, lots of people are carnivore and so on, but still, the academic world, the ivory tower, and the governments that listen to those ivory towers still are largely on the plant-based tip. They're still pretty much pushing for veganism and, you know, let's grow bugs in warehouses to feed people bugs and all this stuff. Get them away from meat. Cows farting are causing climate change, which is also fake. You know, all this that still exists, even though carnivorism has become big in the health world now. Academia and government is still very much trying to get us away from animals. But yeah, I didn't understand why people need to hunt, but it was pure hypocrisy because, you know, I grew up eating pizza pockets and, you know, whatever else, pizzas and stuff, and, you know, processed meats and whatever, farm meats, steaks and stews and all that stuff. It's just hypocrisy to say, oh, these people don't need to hunt. Meanwhile, I'm eating blood. You know, I wasn't responsible for it myself. I just outsourced it to someone else. And when you outsource it, you get all kinds of problems, right? One of the things that pushed me towards veganism was the slaughterhouses. It's a horrible industry. There's only 4 companies that own all the slaughterhouses in America. It's thoroughly corrupt, and the meat that comes out of it is often gross, contaminated, glued together, artificially dyed to look red, even though it's like rotten. You know, there's all kinds of terrible things in the food industry. Never trust a food company, but I'm just saying that my ethos of, yeah, these people, they don't need to hunt. Why do they need to hunt? It's a bit barbaric or whatever. It's nonsense because I was participating in worse barbarism by outsourcing my killing to the food industry, and they do a way worse job. The food industry does a terrible job. Tyson chicken and all this stuff. They treat their animals terribly. They butcher them in horrible, unsanitary conditions. This has been a problem for 50 years at least. And then they mess with our food before we buy it. Like I said, gluing it and dyeing it and all this stuff. Now they're making fake meats. It's even worse. It's even worse. So the highest quality possible meat that we could have is from a wild animal. An animal that was cared for by nature is in general going to do a lot better job than any food corporation. And of course, some small scale farmers who treat their animals really well and slaughter them respectfully and all this stuff and don't contaminate them. That'd probably be even better, but this is an awesome food source that's being taken away from us. And David, you mentioned the gun thing, the Second Amendment. Well, that's right, because that's our excuse to still have guns, right? You know, they're taking away in Canada. I'm from Canada. We don't have a self-defense thing. You're not allowed to defend yourself. If someone breaks into your house and you club them with a stick, you're at fault. You're the criminal. You will be charged. There's crazy stories where like a burglar can fall down your stairs and sue you, even though they broke into your house. It's nuts. We don't have self-defense there. Well, I'm sure they want that in America as well, even though self-defense is still a legitimate reason to carry a weapon. But the main excuse for Second Amendment people, other than defense, has always been hunting. Well, we got to have weapons to hunt. Well, they don't want you to hunt. They don't want you to hunt. They don't understand it. They don't participate in it. And they think we should all be fine eating factory food and bugs and stuff grown in warehouses. Why not, right? That's the way they think. I'm just saying, I just wanted to throw that out there. I no longer believe these things. I do believe that the more natural, the better. And I'm eager to start hunting myself. I'm hoping Dusty invites me out for deer season next year, to be honest. You know, because a city guy like me, we need some help to figure out how to do it. But I remember fishing. It's been a while, but I remember fishing. I remember how great it felt to get out, be at peace, just watch the ducks land on the water and, you know, spend some quality time with the old man or the buddy or with whatever. You know, it was very nice. This indoor living in front of a computer sucks compared to some good old fishing. And I'm assuming hunting is very similar as well. You know, it's not just about the food, although that is a big part of it too, cutting us off from a very healthy food source. Deer meat is incredibly healthy, incredibly nutritious, especially compared to a Tyson chicken or a cricket burger or whatever other garbage they want us to eat, right? Look at the food plate that the government gives us. They're saying that processed foods is somewhat equal to, natural meat, and it's nonsense.
And David had a good point too about this being celebrities, because I don't know
They're
if
all
you
vegan.
are all thinking, well, I just want to go back to Missouri where Jay's at, because Jason Sumner is the Missouri director back in 2019, was with Kristen Schuler, who's got the prion hypothesis and talks about synthetic prions in her paper in front of Congress, Jay, in front of Congress, spewing the propaganda back in 2019. That's a Missouri director.
Unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
And there's been some big guys in the industry, and you know them. I won't mention their names, that have had him on their podcasts.
I know. Yep. I don't get it. And I'd like to think maybe they've changed their position since then, but I don't know. I mean, it's mind blowing to me. I don't understand it. It just makes no sense. I mean, it's like somebody saying 2 and 2 equals 137. I mean, that's how stupid you'd have to be to look at this situation and say what they're doing is right. It's so asinine. It's so over the top that it's criminal. It's evil. It's unthinkable what they're doing. Yet they continue to do it. And why? I think we all know why.
I find it interesting that these same people that hate hunting are willing to do mass murder of deer. What a weird thing. You guys are barbaric hillbillies because you like to kill deer, but we're gonna kill them. What sense does this make? David said we can't make sense because it's criminal. I guess that's true.
And we're the Nazis. We're the activists. That's what we've been continually get called. We're really, a lawsuit would be awesome, and it's going to be down the road, I'm sure. But if all the people would just stand up, this game would literally be over.
That's what I was going to say, is that out of this podcast, if anyone watching this podcast, the one thing you can do to help is say no to testing, say no to letting them anywhere near your property. Just tell them to hit the road when they show up knocking on your door because they need a piece of property. If the general public will at least do that to begin with, that would help. But it's an education process. And unfortunately, we're fighting an evil propaganda, fear-mongering group out there that's how they sell this thing. That's how they sell it to the general, to the guys like you're talking about that aren't hunters. Or maybe they're just landowners, or they don't like hunting. They're anti-hunting. Although you would think somebody that was anti-hunting wouldn't want them to come in and just kill things, other than, I suppose, they get fed the line, well, we need to kill them so that, your dog doesn't get it, or your sheep don't get it, or your cow doesn't get it, or whatever. They always like to paint that, like I said before, that gray area is a big area.
Even though that transmission between species has never happened and never will happen. And
all BS. Yeah. Completely.
I'm sure everyone listening to this knows this, but it's worth at least saying it out loud. There's no such thing as new diseases. I'm sure David, with his pathology background, could concur here. Diseases don't just come out of nowhere. You don't get a new pandemic of something. It doesn't exist. That means it's fake, right? The diseases we know about can change in prevalence, and that's it, basically.
So depending on the disease type, viral or bacterial, there aren't any new diseases. However, there are a lot of diseases that we don't know about. And if you're a food plotter, you understand seed bank. Well, there's diseases that we have not seen in years and years and years that are locked in various components under layers of soil, in ice, etc. And diseases, perfect example is the flu, are constantly mutating. And that's the whole thing about antibiotic resistance, bacterias, and how they become resistant. But yeah, it's a finite resource. There's no aliens bringing new diseases to the planet Earth. However, what there are criminals and criminal funding going towards gain of function. And you guys have probably all heard of Lyme disease. I just went through it. It was god awful. I didn't know I had it, so I got into the mid stages of it before I identified it. And I never got the bullseye rash. Well, the more and more research I did on that, Lyme disease came from a government lab on Plum Island, just north of Lyme, Connecticut. Thus, why Lyme, Connecticut donated its name to Lyme disease biological warfare station on Lyme, Connecticut, just north of their coast. And their specialty was biowarfare, chemical and disease delivery via insects. You can't make it up. Look it up. It's insane. It was back in the 70s. Our government has been doing some god-awful things for a very long time in that department. One quick thing to address the hordes when they're afraid of eating CWD contaminated meat. What a joke. I can't even believe those words come out of my mouth, but that's the narrative. The Oneida incident in Oneida, New York, 250 people unwillingly consumed venison at a fire department banquet that was CWD positive. Don't know how that happened, but that was like 16, 17 years ago. That's the case study, 250 people. And I would imagine, Dusty, this is where they got their human dimensions start from. 250 people, 16, 17 years ago, Oneida incident, all of them ate CWD infested meat, contaminated, joke, whatever, hate to say it. None of them to this day have ever had a symptom. Not one, except for the majority of them stopped eating venison because they got scared of it.
Maybe it's a 50-year latency period.
Or 100.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that's kind of funny is with their, when you talk to these people, these experts on CWD, they always say, you ask them the question, say, well, how come there's never been a documented case of a deer dying of CWD? Well, because a deer can carry and not show any symptoms for up to whatever this period of time is. And I'm like, well, what's the average age expectancy of a deer anyway? A mature buck is lucky if he gets to 4 years old in the wild, and you're saying that they may have it, but they just don't show any. Well, who cares if they have it? They're not dying of it. What difference does it make? And it's certainly not hurting anyone. It's just like, it's like hearing about, back whenever the pandemic was going on and somebody would die in a car accident and then they get them in there and do an autopsy and find out that they had COVID. So it's a COVID death, kind of same way as whenever they're testing these deer that are dead along the highway, they get hit by a car, but they had CWD. So, I guess they died of CWD, even though they got smashed on the front end of a truck.
So Dusty and others, I think one of the problems that we're creating for ourselves is that we're trying to rationalize why this is happening when it's irrational. We're trying to rationalize to the people that are causing this to happen when they are irrational, aka criminal. It's their money. It's their life. It's like the mob, right? I've explained how we got to where we are within these agencies. I think that we're missing the mark on how to fight CWD, the narrative, and et cetera. I think what we have to do is find another similar instance where the government was involved in something of this nature or a large corporation involved in something in this nature and how that was stopped. Because you're never going to be able to look at somebody that's taking in $100 million for their lab or $1 million for their lab, or their whole existence depends on their CWD research, or for that matter, waterfowl research or deer research, and tell them anything that is outside of what they believe, because their entire existence depends on that narrative. You're not going to get through their heads. It's like trying to get through the head of an extreme left liberal person, and they probably say the same about an extreme right person. So I think in the fact that we're like trying to shoot holes in all their theories, that's all fine and dandy to attract more people to the truth, because a lot of people, especially hunters, are rational and have a lot of common sense. But as far as defeating the mechanism, I think Jay said it, you either show up in mass and protest, which good luck with that, because I've been working with hunters trying to get that type of thing done for 12 to 15 years, and I'll have 200 say they're coming and 20 will show up. And the game agencies know how to avoid these things too, because they'll plan these public meetings Wednesday at 2 o'clock when the common layman has to work, etc. I think that we have to get outside the box on looking us how to defeat this. I think court obviously is a good one, but it takes a lot of money. And then typically judges and things of that nature are still going to, I can't tell you how many court cases I tried, but it was well over 300 and I only lost two. And probably some of them I shouldn't have won. The judge just believed me over the defendant. And I wasn't lying. I was telling the truth, but I didn't have all the evidence. And I thought I did at the time, but the defendant was able to shoot enough holes in there, or even I was like, okay, not going to win this one. And the judge gave me the win because he believed me. He knew me. So there's some of that in the court system that you would have to deal with. Canada, obviously, it sounds like you guys got a good judge up there. But we got to get outside the box, suck the funding out. Thank God. I mean, here's the big deal. Somebody, i.e. Ted Nugent, or a couple other people, have got to get into Donald Trump Jr.'s ear and got to feed it to Dodge. I think that's our biggest blessing right now. That funding is probably cut, if not already cut. Dusty or someone really, if you want to escalate that, you find out about those tests. There was the rumor circulating that the tests were being built by a pharmaceutical company owned by BlackRock and or Vanguard. You put that piece on an earmarked note and get it to Donald Trump Jr. or Donald Trump, Elon Musk. That stuff's going to get nipped in the bud immediately.
We need Junior bad. That's exact. That you're 100% spot on. I think that is at this point the only way to really do something. And I'm going to call out Michael Waddell right now. He's a good friend of mine, and I haven't even never talked to him about this until you just said that. I know he knows John Jr. personally. I'm going to reach out to Michael and tell him he needs to help us on this. I guarantee you, Michael's on our side of this, and we need to get in. We need Don Jr.'s ear on this thing for sure.
Jay, you sound like probably the most connected person here on the call.
I don't know if I'm that connected. I've been in this fight for a long time through this, and I've been in contact with some people that are a whole lot smarter than I am. I mean, obviously with Nugent, Dr. Kroll, there's a lot of people in the industry that I think, that could help us, but Don Jr. would be the one. I agree. If we could get him to look at this, this isn't a lot different, than what's going on with Doge. And another parallel to this is everyone's complaining about our egg prices. Well, they just went in and wiped out 2 million chickens, not that long ago because of the quote unquote bird flu, which was ridiculous. And now
same thing.
Up to like 22 months, I think, for us to get back to where we were with the number of chickens we had so that the egg prices will come down. But kind of a similar situation with, they go in and they're trying to wipe out a bunch of deer to keep deer from dying. Well, they went in, they wiped out a bunch of chickens to keep chickens from dying. And now we're dealing with the consequences of it. So
that's because there was $850 million thrown at H5N1 too, Jay. Same thing, just on steroids. Yep. But Don Jr., I'll put a plug in for Hunter Nation. He's on Hunter Nation's board. So
yeah,
one of the good things that are behind us. So
that's who we need. We really do. And I'll ask Nugent about that too, because he's really big in Hunter Nation also. And I'll ask Ted if he can get Don Jr. to the table, because that's what we need. I mean, we got to have somebody that can actually do something at that level.
Well, right now they're taking the chainsaw to agencies that might, I don't agree with it, but they might even be able to paint the picture that they do something of value. Might. And they're being cut. In the case of CWD, the Deer Agency, the H5N1, all this stuff, these fake animal diseases, and any agency that's dealing with these fake animal diseases, they can't even pretend to show something productive. Like, this is what we've done with the money. This is what you got for your money. Nothing. All they have is dead deer and dead ducks and dead geese and dead chickens and whatever other animal they want to go to next. That's all they have to show for it. They've done nothing to prevent anything. I don't think they'll try, but I don't think they could come up with a spreadsheet and like, no, our actions have directly led to saving 20,000 deer. They can't do that. All they've got is bodies. So there's not even the semblance of productivity here of getting anything for the money. It should be an easy cut fired immediately. All you guys find something else to do.
And until you
Agreed.
get people to the table, like Don Jr., like Jay was talking about, is just getting people to say no. And you look in your state, Dusty, like, what is it? It's over 80% of the land is privately owned.
94.
What's that, 94? Yeah, and then I think Missouri is the same thing. Like it's almost 90% of the land is private. If you can get these people all on board and just say, no, we're not doing this. But the sad fact is, how many of those private landowners have already, DNR and these agencies have already gotten their ear and just repeating the same thing over and over again, like these elderly people that don't know, and then just allow them to do it. But I think regardless, they're going to do it. They'll go to state land. They're going to get their numbers. They're going to get the data that they need because it's all fabricated anyway. If they want positives, they're going to pull it off the shelf.
Exactly.
They'll make the numbers meet. But until you can get people to say no and just stop them from what they're doing, but I still think it all comes down like you need Don Jr. You need somebody to come in and you stop that federal funding. I tell you, it's going to come to a screeching halt pretty quick.
Well, of course, nobody would do this on their own volition. Nobody would say, no, I'm just so passionate about killing these deer to save them that I'm going to do it even without federal funding. No way. Just rhetorical question here. How many people do you think would agree to having their dog killed because it might have some disease, but it has no symptoms? You're holding a dog right now, Jay. They came in, they said, we tested your dog. We put a swab up its rectum. We think it has prions. We want to kill your dog just in case it gives its disease with no symptoms to some other dog. Do you think anybody would actually do that?
No.
Great point. None. Zero.
When you
So
look,
there's something. Go
they
ahead.
Alzheimer's, they're all neurodegenerative disease, but they want to run with CWD that it's highly contagious and always fatal. And this is how we have to do it. We have to kill them. Well, maybe they should take that same practice and go into a hospital where there is a bunch of Alzheimer's patients and say, hey, well, that one's got Alzheimer's. So we better kill everybody on this level here to save everybody else because, that's how you do it. It just makes that much sense. Nobody's dying. No deer have died. No people have died. They die with it. A lot of times they don't die from it. And even like Alzheimer's and all those diseases, they don't die from that disease. It's usually something else that they die from, whether it's pneumonia, and the same in deer. And I think a lot of people, there was a few farms in Wisconsin that they said even the ones that they tested, okay, they claim they test positive, but when they did the whole scope on them, it was pneumonia is finally what wiped them out. So I think there's a bigger thing to go on, but if they still can't identify what the causative agent is, stop talking about it until you can come up with it and show that it's a self-replicating disease and this is how it's spread. Like EHD is still far. EHD, cars on the highway, predation. There's 101 other things that are far more that they could be doing something with other than CWD. It doesn't even rank up there.
I'm selfish in my part of the country. I wish that the hundreds of millions of dollars that they've wasted on CWD, I wish they would have taken a portion of that and do some research into trying to find out a way to control the midge that causes EHD, because that is the true killer of deer. I mean, we've, unfortunately, with the way our weather's been here in the Midwest over the last few years, it used to be in 2012, we had a terrible wipeout here in southern Iowa, northern Missouri, and other states. But since then, it seems like it's getting more and more, not as bad as 2012, but we're having it every year. And this last year was pretty bad. And it just seems like with our weather, we can have good weather through July, and then all of a sudden it dries up. We don't get any rain for a month and a half, and that's all it takes. And these water holes shrink up. We get a lot of mud around there. The midge infestate. The deer have to congregate to a certain area. And some properties are worse than others. I think properties that have rivers and creeks through them, you get a little bit better, a better chance of not having a wipeout. But if you got a property that's just got ponds and you go through that and you're in this part of the country, I mean, it's been devastating. I wish there was a way. I know as landowners and farmers and hunters and everybody, I mean, we'd all chip in or be tickled to death to donate to that process to try and stop this midge, and help save a lot of the deer during these EHD pandemics that we seem to have every year. They just seem to be getting worse. But of course, there's no money in trying to figure out what's, what's causing we know what's causing EHD, but how to stop the midge, and how to kill it. I wish there was some way. I know there's some companies out there that are now making some supplements that they claim will help the deer to fight off EHD, and which we know that deer don't always die of EHD, but it really weakens them. And the ones that do make it then become, immune to it. But it's terrible. It's
Jay, let me give you a couple of things on that. So I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. There's times of the year we have a no-see-em. It's the same as a midge. It just doesn't carry EHD. We don't really have that outbreak here. But what we do have is we're constantly humid. We're right on the coast. Temperatures, 98 to 104, 110% humidity. So if there's biting insects and disease-carrying insects, they're here. Backpack sprayer or food plot sprayer, water, which does not, become soluble with a light kerosene mixture, above ground tanks, and I've hearing and started kind of messing around with stevia. And the way I came across stevia, which is just an artificial sweetener, but when stevia dries, it makes this really, what's the way to put it? A membrane when it dries. And I started picking up on it because here in the South, we're spraying our new construction homes, and I now own a construction company. I got away from all that nonsense I was in back in the day. And we spray our 2x4s in a newly framed house with a water mixture and stevia. And that way, and it creates an airtight pocket. So the midges are doing their reproductive cycle in the mud of that pond. That's what they're doing. They're breeding. So back in the day, if you can go back and just look up a little malaria research, what we did was put oil across ponds that killed the mosquitoes because they can no longer breathe. Guaranteed it's the same process with the midge. Find a pond that's somewhere that that you have since you're out there. I would love to do it. I've been wanting to experiment with this. So the kerosene sprayed around the edge of the pond in a light format is going to kind of edge the deer away. It's not going to hurt the deer if they still drink, but it'll help it kills the midge, creates a airproof barrier, and it's slightly toxic. And it will most likely, in my head, push the deer away to your in-ground tanks, above-ground tanks. But stevia, I think, is going to have a big promise in a backpack sprayer and or a food plot sprayer.
That's interesting.
Neat stuff. We'll see. But yeah, I'm with you on that. I got to go after this one. I got a big meeting. George Jones, famous country singer, has a song, Who's Gonna Fill Their Shoes? The left, the anti-hunters, started working on this 20 years ago. They started filling our shoes in these agencies. So not when, not if, but when we absolutely do defeat this, we have to make certain that the right people get into these positions moving into the future, or we're just going to wind up here again.
Yep.
David, before you go, would you mind touching on this hog thing? You brought it up, and none of us knew what you were talking about. They were researching wild hogs before, and then that ended.
Man. Yeah. So APHIS they were distributing to all these laboratories, Texas A&M, University of Texas, all of your big wildlife, Clemson University, University of Baton Rouge, all of your big areas where wild hogs are prolific, and all of your big wildlife-based science colleges were receiving just all kinds of money. So how does the program work? The program works is that you have a professor with a doctorate. Under him is his predoctoral candidates. Under him are the master's thesis. And they're all got to get paid for these studies, right? And so what better way to control the narrative than to fund these studies? I've been a part of those studies. I've been paid by some of those studies. And one of the big, huge things in the outdoor industry, Department of Agricultural industry, and the wildlife colleges was feral hog research. And about 20 years ago, massive grant, I don't know the exact number, became available. And all these college universities, various testing labs and everything else, piled in and got their hands in the feral hog research pot. Feral hog meaning wild pigs. And it really started the Department of Agriculture because they recognized how much damage these animals were doing. And so the research, some of the stuff that was just insane, some of the research was anywhere from the sodium nitrite as a hog exterminating chemical, artificial intelligence to raise the lid on a delivery trap, which fabulous idea, all the way down to, you know, biting insects that transfer brucellosis, because brucellosis is a pretty big thing and feral hogs carry it. But just millions and millions of dollars were spiraling around and going down this drain to every little hand that was in the feral research program. And then that funding dried up. And all these people were left treading water, wondering what we're going to do next. There's no doubt in my mind that those people, the heads of these departments, came together and said, hey, we've got to find something. Well, boy, you talk about a jackpot. Okay, feral hog hunting at that time was, and still is, pretty, getting bigger and bigger. But oh my God, look at what we have. This lady back in 60, whatever, discovered something in deer that had been where sheep were, or maybe she created it all on her own. Maybe she was given an agenda to create it. But that the CWD fell right on the back of the feral hog funding being dried up, done.
Because these researchers don't want to go and get a job at Walmart, right? They've got to do research.
So yeah, so literally, I mean, a guy that I sent a pretty daggone big chunk of money to, who was doing some mallard research, he is literally, I thought this guy was cool. He's literally just revealed himself as that guy. He is enraged. He is becoming deranged. And his research it's not really critical. Here's another thing, guys. All this research we're doing, the guys in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and Jay, or any of you guys, I can take you that have never hunted before, and I promise you, I can give you the basic tenets of wildlife biology in one day, and then teach you how to run a tractor the next day, teach you how to trap like the next week. And I can turn you loose on a piece of property and make you a successful game manager. It's not rocket science. They want it to be rocket science. All this research that's being done on the wild turkey right now, hundreds of millions are starting to pour into it through the NWTF, through Turkeys for Tomorrow, which I support. It's not rocket science. You want turkeys on your property, you have the habitat, you get rid of the predators, you don't over harvest, you will have a plethora of turkeys. The end, it's just not. But these guys want to come out there, they become celebrities, they have their own Facebook pages, people start worshiping them, and anyway, it goes on and on and on. But yeah, it all tied back to the feral hog research, which was the biggest push since the restocking efforts of the white-tailed deer back in the 30s and 40s, and of the eastern wild turkeys in the 50s through the 70s. Those were the two big key things back there that cost money. We actually cared. We were restocking, increasing hybrid vigor. And then the DEI and affirmative action came over, changed the atmosphere of the agencies. I mean, there you have it. But again, we can't miss the dartboard thinking about, oh, they're wrong here, we're wrong there. You could definitely lean the masses to be on your side, but we got to come up with another solution to stop it.
David, do you have to go?
Yeah, I got a boogie. I mean, I can take a question or two if you've got them, and then I need to boogie you.
Well, I appreciate you coming on here for sure and sharing your experience within the government agencies. I think we all know that they're corrupt, but you know, it's good to hear from somebody who was on the inside, where you literally just said they stocked the shelves with anti-hunting people, and now that's what you get, an agency who doesn't want to support hunting. Whereas, as far as I see it, people who hunt and fish are the most concerned about the environment that they hunt and fish in, at least that environment, right? Not saying that hunters and fishers are the most environmentally conscious people in the world, but far more than the average suburbanite or urbanite. You know, you guys actually do care because you live it. So there was two major things I wanted to touch on in this episode here that hasn't been touched already. Well, one, Jan, you brought up property rights and your property's being messed with and your property value. I want to get back to that. I want to circle back to that. But since most of the people in my audience, I'm sure, are urbanites like me, And I do live in the country now, but I'm not acclimated. I still carry those city roots, and I still am not fully on board. Well, I'm on board in mental. I'm just, I'm not one of those guys yet. I'm not one of you guys yet. I'm trying to be. But I wanted to hear from you guys. What do you get out of hunting? What do you get out of hunting? What's it like? What does it do for you? How important is it in your life, and why?
Like it's a lifestyle. Like it gets you out. I don't know. It's just something that I was raised. I'm 51 years old, and that's all I've ever known is just to learn how to provide for yourself. And like you said, there's lots of people in the urban cities that you take them out there, they're lost, they're in trouble. But I try to raise my kids. I got two boys, and it's not just the hunting; it's the whole outdoor understanding. What makes things ticks, how they grow, how they work, to where you get in a situation you can look after yourself. That's my take on it. It's not just about the trophy. It's understanding how things work in the wild. And CWD has been one of those things that just you hear it so much, where common sense kicks in. Is like, that doesn't make sense, because everything that they've done so far as all their testing, and it's highly contagious, but yet nobody's seeing dead deer laying everywhere, and you still haven't provided certain specifics of your so-called disease that makes it highly contagious. So I always keep going back. What's testing positive? You still haven't provided that, but I want to still instill that into my kids, that it's nature. Get out there and utilize it, figure out how things work. And it, to me, it's just, it makes you question things, and nobody's questioning the people up top, of what's going on. Why do they keep using it? It's a tool. CWD is nothing but a tool for them to control you. And as soon as people start asking the right questions, what do? They start pointing the finger. Well, it's their fault. It's the game farmer's fault. It's these guys' fault. And they just get us fighting amongst ourselves, so where it's sleight of hand. Okay, well, they're fighting now. We can continue doing what we're doing over here, and just wasting money. But that's just my take on it.
Jay, what do you get out of hunting? I think you stepped out for a second when I asked the question. I just want to bring this to a human level before we go back to the government and then messing with people's property rights and our personal rights and property values and all that stuff. You've been an avid outdoorsman for a long time. Why? What do you get out of it, and why is it so important to you to maintain it?
You know, it's kind of funny. I feel the same way about hunting now that I did the day I started. And I started, I still remember the very first bow that I bought through Montgomery Ward's. I knew absolutely nothing about hunting. I knew I loved to be outdoors. We moved to Missouri on a farm. And I don't know, for me, it's always been, it's been a peaceful time, that it's just something I enjoy, being out there with nature. Obviously, through the years, it's become a lot more than that for me, because of, it's what I've done for a living and been very fortunate to do for the last 35 years. But it's not, if I were to not do the show anymore, I wouldn't quit hunting, because I still enjoy it, and I think for me, it's been a lot of it's about the relationships that I've had with hunting, being able to raise my kids in that type of an atmosphere. Taking my son in a backpack when he was little, and now he's 27 years old, and he's co-hosting the show with me, and we still hunt together all the time. My daughter doesn't hunt as much now, but I did with her. So it's just, and then all the relationships I've made over the years through hunting. It's just, I can't even imagine. It's hard for me to imagine not being in the outdoors, or not knowing what that's like. When I see people that don't hunt, and it's hard for me to put myself in their perspective of, like you were talking about earlier, not eating meat, or not hunting, and questioning why I do it. And it's like, for them to not understand me, I can see where it goes both ways, because I would have a hard time understanding how they wouldn't miss out on that, but unless obviously they don't know anything about it. But yeah, it's just something that I've truly enjoyed, and continue to enjoy, and probably will till the day I die.
Dusty, how about you? When we first met, you told me that you ate almost 100% deer, and I was like, wait, really? So it's obviously a big part of your life. When did you get into it, and what does it mean to you?
Well, we definitely have been into it from a young age. My grandpa got me started, I don't know, 35 years ago, but we live in the country because of hunting. But I would say one of the biggest things is the relationships we've made. And that's what I've actually enjoyed with the CWD journey. Can't tell you the people we have met across the nation, from breeders to landowners to sportsmen to you name it. And I mean, the relationships is just, and that's what this is all about. I mean, what is life without being in nature, spending time with family and friends and building traditions and relationships? I mean, it is my calm, and I am forever grateful for being able to be in the outdoors with my family and friends and meeting y'all as well.
I'll chime in on my odd perspective here. So I did fish when I was a kid. We had a little trailer out on a lake that we would travel to on the weekends and stuff. And my dad loved being there. And fishing was one of the only things I had to do there. I didn't have much to do, so I fished a lot. And I liked that time. I was happy with that time, and I'd like to get back to fishing. Now I'm in a busy business lifestyle, and it sucks. But a habit that I've had, a hobby that I've had for a very long time, is spray painting, graffiti. Now I've graduated onto pretty pictures and stuff, but I still like to paint them on the side of a bridge instead of a canvas because it's more fun and it gets me outside. And living life indoors on a computer and on screens sucks. And I like to do it with my friends. It's kind of similar to hunting, guys. Kind of similar. We gotta leave. We gotta pack up bags. We gotta bring water. We gotta bring food. We gotta trek into the woods a lot of times to find a bridge or an old abandoned cabin or something like that. And I crave it. And I think it is mostly just being outdoors. I don't think there's that much of a difference of what you actually do. But the suburbanites, I spend half my time still. I live in the deep country up in Canada, but I spend half the time down here in the suburbs of Houston, Texas. And when people go outside in the suburbs, I've lived in cities and suburbs and towns and small towns and whatever. But in the city suburbs, when people go out, it's just for like a hike. You walk up the mountain, you walk down the mountain, you walk in the. It's okay. It's okay. It's just kind of boring, right? There's no real purpose to it. Exercise is okay. It's just some people are a lot more into exercise than I am. I'm not really into it. So if I'm going to go outside, I like to actually do something, have a purpose to do it. And even if you're just sitting there waiting for a deer to walk by, to me, it's pretty similar to going out and finding a nice abandoned barn to paint or something like that. You got a purpose to be there. Your friends are there with you, but the whole experience revolves around being outdoors. Even if it's a back alley or something, honestly, even not out in nature per se, you're outdoors, you're not on the screens, you're doing something productive. And in the case of hunting, you get food from it too, and food is ridiculously important. I mean, obviously. But we see, especially in these days where food prices have gone through the roof, and like getting some food for free, well, for your efforts, is a splendid thing. People everywhere are complaining about the price of foods, and one of the reasons why the price of foods has gone up is because we're totally dependent on mechanical farming, factory farming and all this stuff, which produces terrible quality food anyways. So to have an activity that brings you outside, brings you together with your family. Every single one of you guys mentioned your family, right? My grandfather never showed me anything. I'm kind of resentful about that. Because we grew up in the city and suburbs and we just don't do those things. Having fishing, having hunting, having anything like that where you connect with your grandfather, Dusty, or your kids, Jan and Jay, you know, who's doing these things right now? Every kid's being raised by an iPad. So I think it was important when you guys were coming up, when you guys were kids. I think it's even more important now for kids to be taught outdoor things, even if it's like skateboarding and stuff, just anything to get you outside, but especially anything that'll get you out into the forest, into the mountains, into the rivers, which are my favorite spots to paint. I love a bridge in the middle of nowhere on a nice river. Bring a picnic with me. It's half about the painting, it's half about the outdoor experience. Would you guys agree that's sort of the same thing I'm getting from hunting here from you guys? It's half about the hunting.
For sure.
Absolutely. It's not even about the harvest anymore, especially the older you get.
No, it's about sitting in the. For me, it's about sitting in a tree stand and watching the everything get light in the mornings. Listen to the birds wake up, seeing the squirrels. You know, a harvest or a kill is the end result on a very small portion of the amount of time you spend out there. I mean, Does it happen? Is it great when it happens? It's absolutely wonderful, but it doesn't happen very often. If that was the only reason you were hunting, you'd be highly disappointed, 95% of the time. But it's the 95% of the time that you're not killing anything that I think is what is such an allure to all of us in just the connection and just being out there and enjoying those things. And back on one other thing you mentioned about back to the CWD thing and about today's generation and getting kids out there. And just like when I was younger, I didn't have an iPad. I didn't have an iPhone. My dad told me to go outside and play and come home when the lights turned on the street, although we didn't really have many of those in the country. But the thing that concerns me a little bit about the CWD, and I think maybe gets overlooked a little bit, is that, our numbers as hunters is diminishing as it is. Well, you add CWD into this mix, and with all the false information that's out there, how many moms and dads out there that don't really know a lot about this are going to encourage their kids to go deer hunt whenever they've heard, there's people don't want to eat the meat because they're scared. They don't know anything about it. So are they, how many people are we turning away? How many people is the MDC turning away? How many families, generational hunters that could come up and enjoy the things that we've all enjoyed? How many people are being deterred because of CWD? I think this reaches a lot further down the road than just today. And that's my whole concern with it. That's why I just want it to stop so that it can go away as a bad memory, because if they keep this up, I think the detriment is coming even further down the road, generational. Not only with our deer herd being decimated, but with the number of hunters that are going to be out there to keep this future going. And I think it's shameful what they've done and what they are doing. And maybe they know that's what they're doing, and maybe that's why they're doing it, but it's not good.
Sorry to interrupt, Jay, Dusty, and Ryan. I got to run here. My son is texting me relentlessly here. We got a basketball tournament to get to. So, I find it great talking to you guys and seeing some like-minded people that can see what CWD is, exactly what it is manipulation by the government. Just, it's a tool for wasting money and ruining an industry. So,
thanks so much, Jan. Appreciate you a bunch.
And I hope to do this again some other time.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Jen. It was good to hear a little bit about your story there. I'm very interested more in how the government can interfere with your own property and diminish your property value and come on and tell you what to do with your land and your animals and all that stuff based on a fake disease. But maybe we will get to have another chance to do a second take on that as well.
We can do that for sure. Thank you so much, guys.
So, Jay, you really, I think, are hitting the nail on the head here with the future of hunting is definitely in jeopardy. That's not even a question there, for sure.
No.
But I think that's on purpose, because I do think that the liberal sentiment in general is anti-environment. And the reason I say that is because they're all city folk. I worked in a university too, by the way. I've been in the ivory tower. We're so disconnected from the real world. And it was a long time ago, but still, I got a taste of it and saying, wow, these people are taking up activism positions and things that they either don't understand or that they actively resent. It's just a very, very strange phenomenon. So nobody in the ivory tower has any reason to support hunting, has no understanding of it, and would absolutely want to see it cease, and yet they're supporting mass culling of animals. It's the strangest thing ever, but they definitely don't want anyone hunting. They definitely want us all in cities that are all connected with smart grids and whatever, and we all eat from factories that probably don't even have light in them and stuff like that. It's not even a conspiracy theory. That's definitely the future that they want. That is what's being funded. That's what's being promoted. Bugs are good for you. Don't worry about GMOs. All this fake food, fake stuff. They don't want you to have any connection to the earth. And we don't, as a result. I grew up in the suburbs. I never grew a pickle. Our cucumber made it into a pickle. I never did anything like that. You never touched the soil. Never got my hands dirty like that. That is what the future is, if we don't do something about it. And, do we want a generation of iPad kids making decisions about the environment? I really, truly hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. It's hard for me to look at that as a reality where I live because I'm not, I live in a very small town, like 150 people, and I'm an hour away from a Walmart. So it's hard for me to believe that that's the way it is. But I'm not stupid. I know that's, it's crazy the direction our world has went. And yeah, I think it's a lot tougher being a kid today, growing up and not having as many, and having all the things out there that at your fingertips, like iPads and iPhones, and but I just hope that the MDC and all these other agencies at some point just go away and leave our deer herd alone, and just let Mother Nature take care of itself.
And that's why we're standing up and fighting too. It's not for personal gain whatsoever. We're literally fighting for our kids and our grandkids and the future generations. And they use that against us, that we're the ones, but we're actually the stewards of the land. We're not the ones out here slaughtering deer to save the deer.
Yeah.
And anyone who's got a hunting property, obviously you don't want that property turned into a parking lot, right? You want to preserve the environment in which the animals that you're hunting live in, right? You don't want polluted rivers and all this stuff. Meanwhile, a lot of these, I'm calling them liberal as a catchphrase, but in general, modern people, they're not connected to it at that level. They might say that they don't want polluted rivers, but they're not doing anything about it. They're buying from the industries that pollute the rivers in the first place. It's just window dressing, it's just virtue signaling for the most part. And it's like these people just want to watch nature on National Geographic television or something like that. But even then, no, they don't, because they're really just watching TikTok. I don't mean to be so cynical, but I don't see their point here. They're not doing anything to preserve the environment other than virtue signaling sometimes. But most of the virtue signaling is about, human initiatives like DEI and stuff. It's really not about protecting the environment. And so, the ones that I see wanting to do something, like you guys here, bugging me to come on and host this, even though this is not my subject, because you care deeply about the environment and you want to get on any platform that you can to talk about this. So, I mean, I hope more people do stand up and do something about it. And maybe this last subject will make them more serious about it. What Jam was saying there with his own property rights being messed with and stuff, I think is absolutely massive, because what these fake diseases do is give the government an excuse to come on into your life. And we all saw this with COVID. It doesn't even need to be expanded upon that much. We saw this. Oh, there's this fake disease. Your rights are out the window. Your employment rights, your rights to assembly, your rights to speech, even doctors being silenced and all this stuff, all under the name of a fake disease. Well, in this case, if they say that one of your deer or a deer near your property had CWD or something, that gives them license to come right on in. And I'm not sure exactly what Jan's story was there. Dusty, do you know more about what happened to him?
I don't know as far as his ranch goes, but as far as like the TPWD in the state of Texas, Texas Parks and Wildlife, they've been slaughtering the breeders down there for years. And now if they get a detection within 5 miles of their facility, their whole facility is quarantined. And their deer aren't dying. Like, we're working with attorneys down there now to help save a friend's ranch because he had one suspect positive 2 years ago, and they still won't lift his quarantine 2 years later.
And that's the
Here's
guy
what
we
I
spoke
don't.
about last time, right? And his whole business is gone, basically.
Yeah, and they've only slaughtered. Texas is awful because they're not going after the wild deer. They go after just the breeder deer because that's all the TPWD can really go after. Because if they went after the wild deer in the state of Texas, the people would go absolutely ballistic. But like, they've slaughtered 10,000 plus breeder deer in Texas, which is awful. They've destroyed their livelihoods, their businesses. But MDC, like the state J hunts in just south of Iowa there, they've actually culled and slaughtered 23,000 deer and have tested over 320,000 deer. And keep in mind, healthy harvested deer. I mean, this just livelihoods, businesses, people's
Yeah,
reputation.
for what it, and you talk about land prices and whatnot, and you think, well, how is CWD going to affect that? Well, it could absolutely affect that. If you're in an area where it's well known that the MDC has come in and wiped out the deer herd, go try and sell your land and see how much you sell it for. I mean, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, recreational ground is really, been really expensive. It's been good. Those prices, obviously, with the economy and everything, have went down a little bit. But to think that CWD couldn't affect land prices, it absolutely could affect it in certain areas, no doubt.
And you're spot on, Jay, because like some of those breeder ranches in Texas, like they're been so quarantine depopulated. Who's going to want to go buy that ranch that has been so sick with all these prions?
Yeah, you know the thing that's crazy to me is over the years you can kind of see how these game ranches have been targeted, and it really makes no sense to me because I happen to know some people that that own a couple in Texas and in other areas that have had ranches that they've owned. Those people, they test their deer and take so good care of them, more so than anybody else. Yep. So I mean, they're the last ones that are going to want a disease to go through their enclosure and wipe them out, because that's the way they make a living. And yet you'll have an agency come in and wipe them out because one of their deer tested positive for CWD. Well, first of all, who cares if it tested positive for CWD?
Or something.
That's my answer to everything is who cares? I don't care. So what? It's got CWD. Well, if it spread like wildfire, you would think in an enclosure, if one deer had CWD, they'd all be dead. Because it is 100% fatal. They can't get away. They're going to be, licking on each other, eating out of the same feeders, eating out of the same mineral deals. I mean, that right there ought to tell you the whole thing's a fallacy.
And they're behind a fence. How are they going to get out?
They can't get out. They're in a pen. So, I mean, it's not like they're going anywhere. So, and it's pretty easy to tell if they're all dead or not. I mean, just go in there and look. I don't know. It just shows you how silly the whole thing is. But to go in and wipe out somebody's livelihood just because a deer's got CWD is just mind blowing to me.
It can't just go away either, Jay and Ryan. Like, these people need to be held accountable for putting these people out of business.
Oh, I agree. In that situation, that is about money. In our situation here, just in the general, in the heart of the country here, we just want it to stop. We just want the agencies to go away and leave us alone and let the deer do what they do, period. And we'll be fine. We'll be great. We're going to have some die off every year from EHD. It's part of it. But we're not going to needlessly go out and just wipe out deer herds for the sake of keeping the federal funding coming in.
Right. And because of a test, I call it a test. I don't even call it CWD anymore. It's like they're just testing for something. Detection.
And if you, and I don't know about you, but do you trust the government? They're going to tell you if the deer's really got a test positive for CWD? Whenever they're getting paid, if they get CWD, so they can, they find one and then they can draw their little 5-mile circle around it, and then they can keep killing and keep killing and keep killing, and then move on to they're like locusts. They just keep moving around, So I don't believe them when they do say a deer test positive to CWD, and if it does, who cares? You want to make it go away, quit testing for it.
They're all state and federally funded agencies and universities that have the test behind lock and key. There's only 32 of them. You can't buy a test. You can't. They won't tell you what the test is even picking up. I mean, we've called Ames, Iowa. We've talked to manufacturers and distributors of the ELISA test, and they said you can make those tests pick up whatever you want. Like, you have to tell them what you want the test to detect. But they're behind lock and key, behind 32 universities and state federally funded agencies. I mean, it's all just a hoax.
That's crazy. I hunted with an outfitter in Wyoming that for years and years and years, and they even had him. And they have bad EHD when out there, especially like in Montana, when EHD hits. I mean, it wipes them out. And they were testing. All of a sudden, they started testing all their deer that were killed, and they were, going in and taking I can't remember what it was they had to take out of the eye socket or something. I don't know. They were putting it in a bag and sending it off. And I know they were getting paid by the agency to do that. Sure. They were getting paid to send in the samples of every deer that was killed. And then they would always come back and tell them if they were positive or negative or whatever. And of course they were always all positive, or a lot of them were positive. They were even buying into it. And I just kept my mouth shut, but it was like, you can just see what's happening here. I mean, absolutely. They're just trying to keep feeding the train, feeding the engine.
Yep. Have either of you guys ever known someone that actually got sick from eating deer meat?
I've I don't think there's been one documented case of a human being ever having any negative effect from a CWD and supposed CWD infested venison. I mean, and think about that. I mean, there's, CWD has been documented since the 60s. How many millions of pounds of venison have been eaten all over the country since then, and it's never affected one person?
And you're wearing a shirt, for the audio listeners here, you're wearing a shirt that says, I've killed more deer than CWD.
Probably accurate.
Well, there's
So,
only a couple documented cases in the nation, Ryan. There's only literally like one in North Dakota and maybe a couple in the state of Texas that have actually been necropsied to have myelin deterioration. I mean, that's other than all their inoculation studies with synthetic.
But even so, do they know that deer died of that, or did it just have it after it died?
Right. Well, North Dakota's actually had a brain abscess, which could have been a co-infection.
Did it really die of CWD? They don't know that.
Right.
They just know that it had CWD when it died.
Right.
so this whole chain of events is messed up here, right? Because the tests are bogus in the first place. Dusty and I talked about that on the first episode. It's just like COVID and whatever. You can get them to test little fragments of DNA and get it to tell you whatever you want. Turn up the sensitivity of the test, and you'll get more positives or false positives. So I'm sure almost no one in this audience believes in the tests in the first place. Then you've got animals dying from something that you can't prove exists based on a test that is fundamentally flawed. And even if you throw all that technical stuff away, you've got, as you said, millions of pounds, at least millions of pounds, probably millions of tons over, maybe that's a bit much, millions of tons, but lots and lots of deer meat has been consumed since the 1960s, for sure. Dusty lives on it. Nobody's gotten sick. I've never heard of anyone getting sick. I live in hunting country now. I know people who eat squirrels. They'll eat anything, and they've never gotten sick of anything. And I grew up in the city. You get all these ideas like, oh, don't go near that raccoon, or you would never eat a fox or something like that because they've got wild animal diseases or something. It's such a weird concept to me. I touched on it earlier that, we're all scared in the city and in academia and I'm in the health business now. This comes out in the health business. Oh, you don't want to eat it. You don't want to eat wild animals. They could have all kinds of diseases that you don't know about. Well, I don't care if a fox has arthritis. I'll eat it. Only if you believe something is going to be transmitted to you, and yet that really has not been proven in the vast majority of cases, even close to being proven. And the ones that are proven, I would say, are very, very suspect. But you've got this sentiment that, oh, wild animals are somehow risky or dangerous. When I said earlier, the slaughter industry, the factory farm industry, the transport industry, the messing with meats once it gets to the grocery store is huge. The stuff that we're buying in the store is disgusting for the most part. I know too much about this. I try not to think about it, to be honest, but I don't eat at restaurants. Watch a few episodes of Kitchen Nightmares,
If I go out there and kill a deer and I cut the loins out of it and I bring it here in the house and I cut all the silver skin off of it, all the fat off of it, I'm left with just a pure piece of lean meat. If I go to the grocery store and buy like a Tyson chicken and I bring it home, I guarantee you, if you knew what all was on that before you ate it, you probably wouldn't eat it. The chemicals and the preservatives they put on everything. I mean, who knows? I mean, obviously we all eat it. I mean, I love fried chicken, but it's not the same. I know when I go kill something and I cook it, it's from the field to the skillet. I mean, there's no preservatives, there's no nothing. So for people to say, well, you shouldn't eat wild animals because they could have diseases and whatnot is pretty silly whenever they're going to the grocery store and buying something that has been sitting there for they don't know how long. They don't know what preservatives on. They don't know what dyes are in it. They don't know, if they're actually getting what they think they are getting. So yeah, for that argument falls on deaf ears as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I watched a video recently where lamb is a big scandal. I didn't even know about this until a couple of weeks ago. Lamb being sold as lamb, and it's not. It's literally pork and beef and stuff glued together and like fake charred to make it look like lamb. I mean, yeah, you don't know what you're getting. Wow, you definitely don't know what you're getting. So anyone who's afraid of wild animals, you better be growing your own stuff and raising your own animals. So you got no right to speak because yeah, the filthiest industry is the industrial food industry for sure. And the wild animal might have some contamination. I guess we could fold into this as well. That the probable cause, to me, of most of these deer diseases and other animal diseases is either nutrient deficiencies or poisoning by agricultural chemicals. And I think it was Jan that brought up New Zealand earlier and how they were using double doses of copper on those deer, reindeer crossed with another deer, I forget. Double doses of copper. Well, to me, that makes sense. New Zealand is a notoriously low selenium country. There's low selenium in the soil. It's a very old soil. And that was a big problem when they started to try and raise sheep there. All the sheep were dying. They had to supplement their animals with selenium. This problem has happened in America as well, but New Zealand, it was like the whole country. They just couldn't raise sheep properly there until they started using selenium. Well, copper is a cofactor with selenium, and I'm pretty sure in those feeds they would have been giving them selenium already. So they just needed to boost another one of the cofactors, and the animals started doing better. That makes a lot of sense to me. And when you do hear that there are certain methods, one of you guys mentioned it, of making them less susceptible to the midge, right, to the infection, I would assume that whatever they're giving them has minerals in it that increases their immune system, which would increase their susceptibility to any infectious disease or non-infectious disease for that matter. So, someone asked what would cause the protein to fold, the prion to fold, because prion is a protein. What would cause it to fold? Well, it still hasn't even been proven that it is folded because it still hasn't been proven that it exists in the first place.
It's not even proven that it even exists.
But if it did, if that was true, and this is the cause, the prion is a folded protein, and that's the cause. Something caused it to fold, right? It's like blaming the tumor for the cancer. The tumor is a result of the cancer, right? The prion, if that is the thing, is a result of something going wrong in the body, and it is most likely either deficiencies or poisoning by chemicals or both, to me.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, what's the one thing here in the Midwest that gets sprayed on everything come June? I mean, we're spraying insecticides and pesticides all over our, what's the Roundup? Roundup gets sprayed on all beans, all corn, keeps the weeds out, and then deer are out there immediately eating. I don't know what the cause and effect is of Roundup to animals like that, but it's chemicals. I mean, I'm sure it can't be good. And then that gets passed on through the plant, and then we consume the plant. So, I mean, the amount of chemicals that we as humans and those as wild animals are ingesting on a yearly basis is probably pretty astronomical. But, perhaps that's part of the reason why we're so unhealthy all the time. I don't know.
Well, a white-tailed deer, I just looked up the weights of it. A female is, they say on Google here, is about 100 pounds, and a male is about 150 pounds. So weighs less than a human, but they eat way more than us. So if we eat a salad, it's going to be like, what, a pound? Maybe. That's a huge salad, right? That's a family-sized salad is a pound. When these deer can be eating pounds and pounds and pounds of this stuff every single day. So they're just getting very, very high concentrations of these chemicals, especially if they're eating it directly off the field, especially if it's right after it's been sprayed. There's nothing to dilute it. They didn't wash it off in the sink before they ate it. They didn't soak it in vinegar or anything, right? So they're just getting huge doses of chemicals. And I do believe any of these plagues of any animal that has happened in the 20th century, that would be the primary cause. And since I'm in the business, I gotta mention it. Dusty knows this. Jay, you may not know this. In humans, we have a massive mineral deficiency problem. One of the major reasons is because we dammed all of the rivers. Every important river, practically about 1 million rivers in the world, we dammed them all for hydroelectricity and for flood control. This is over 100 years ago. And now those rivers no longer flood. Whereas in the past, those rivers would be carrying mud, minerals, silt, clay, dirt, whatever, from 1,000 miles away or more. And when the fields would flood, when the rivers would flood, they would flood the fields, which was most of the land mass here. We get massive flooding. That would bring renewed minerals onto the fields. This is why the Dust Bowl happened. We didn't have minerals in the fields anymore. And we know it only takes a few seasons to massively deplete minerals from soils because you grow food on it. The plant, the lettuce, the carrot, whatever, sucks the minerals out of the ground. You put that carrot on a truck and you take it to New York City, it's gone. You exported those minerals. And, they go into the human, some of it goes into the toilet, it goes into the system that we have. It never goes back onto the fields, right? Whereas with the yearly flooding, and this is every civilization ever in history, they either built their civilization on a floodplain directly or went to massive effort to irrigate river water, glacial water, whatever, onto their fields. Without that mineral rich water, fields would dry up, civilizations would die. And the only way that we've gotten around this is by using massive amounts of fertilizers, artificial fertilizers, and pesticides. Now we have weak plants that are growing on mineral deficient soils, and we use pesticides and we kill all the bacteria in the soil. The bacteria are what, and the fungi are they're what allow the mineral to actually be absorbed into the plants. So we kill those. So even if there was minerals in the soil, it doesn't even get into the plants. So we have a mineral deficiency problem as humans, and animals that live around human civilization, which I'm assuming most of these deers we're talking about are, because unless you're going into the middle of Alaska, the deers are probably living mostly around human habitation and eating off of our farm fields and picking off some of our crops as they can. And yeah, they spend some time out there in government land and national parks and stuff, but a lot of them are eating in and around human habitations. Like I live in the country. The bears like to come into town and eat our garbage, rather than being out foraging the natural way. It's just a little bit easier for them. So I'm just saying they're eating off the same mineral deficiency. They're eating off the same mineral deficient fields that we are. But on top of that, they're also getting a much larger chemical exposure because they're eating directly off of the fields, the ones that do.
So is that what my question always is? Is that what these tests are picking up? Are they picking up chemicals in Roundup?
I don't think so. Not an ELISA test or a PCR test. They're just picking up scraps of DNA. And if DNA is off or whatever, it would be because of either nutrient deficiencies or chemicals. But they're not even proving that this is a DNA type of problem, right? PCR is just junk. It's just trash. It's always been trash. You can get yourself measured. Go take an HIV test 5 times in a row. You'll probably get 2 negatives and 3 positives, or 4 negatives and 1 positive. It doesn't matter. It's not accurate. It's just picking up fragments of DNA, and even that is questionable because of something was way more technical than we're going to get into. But even the guy who invented it, Kerry Mullis, right? He invented PCR, and then he spent the rest of his life speaking out against it, saying you can't use this to diagnose things. You can't. You're just amplifying fragments of DNA, and even that is not clear. So even proving the presence of DNA through a PCR test is not actually proof that the DNA was there, if that makes sense. Again, it is way more technical than we can possibly get into right now, and I don't even understand it fully. I just trust the guy who made it and trust a lot of people who have built their careers on this and understand these tests a lot better than we do. And they say it's junk. It's junk. And I'm sure most of the audience believes that anyways. We saw them create a pandemic based on a test before. The test is meaningless.
But that's what I appreciate about Dr. Wally, why his books in the Smithsonian Institute as a national treasure, proving that other than toxins like chemicals, the animals and humans are dying of nutrient deficiencies, which, Jay, you would know this because all we hear about is Colorado, Wyoming, Saskatchewan. Colorado, Wyoming, Saskatchewan. 80% of their mule deer herd has disappeared in Wyoming. And well, they got predation, they got bad winters, and I'm sure the soils aren't good. Majority of those deer are disappearing probably because of nutrient deficiencies and winters and predation, period.
Yep.
And chemicals. Saskatchewan is farm country.
Exactly. But they say they're testing positive while they're testing for something, but what are they testing is always the question. But if you can't see it, it's just still a hypothesis 57 years later with billions of dollars. It's a total waste.
Well, not only if you can't see it, if you can't prove that it's transmissible, which is the keystone here, because even if you couldn't see it, you should be able to prove that it's transmissible. And the fact that they haven't done that, that's what makes this whole thing a crime. That this whole industry exists on something they
if you
can't
link the
prove.
main talking point to it, which is it's 100% fatal, it's 100% fatal and it's transferable, that ought to be a real easy way to say, okay, this is legit. Look at all the dead deer. It's 100% fatal and it is very, very infectious, very transferable. So look at all the dead deer.
And we know ranches in Wisconsin, there's 60-70% detection rate, and not a single deer on their ranches died from it.
Yeah.
Like one deer has died from pneumonia.
And that's the point about this whole thing. Okay, this all started that in Wisconsin was the first one that come around and said, okay, so in order to keep the deer from dying, we're going to kill them all. And they did it. They formed the blueprint. All these years later, they've still got CWD and they're still not dying. And now there's more deer than there was. So the states that are looking at them and going, okay, they had such great success, we're going to do the same thing. Great success. No, it didn't work at all. Zero. It was the worst failure in the history of any kind of conservation. It didn't work at all. Zero. But we're going to keep doing it.
And in fact, isn't the prevalence like
it's insanity?
Dr. Kroll just said, I think the prevalence is like 30, they say 50%, but now it's like 30% in the units that they slaughtered all the deer. It's even higher, but their population's growing.
Exactly.
We
Or
don't
some,
need,
yeah, which begs the question, do deer die of CWD? No, they don't.
right.
So
And
what?
that's
They
why-
got CWD, but I don't even know if they really know what CWD is. It's 3 letters. I mean, I know it stands for chronic wasting disease.
Well, it's just
Conservation
labeled.
wasting dollars is what I would, makes more sense.
Clearly wasted dollars. It's just they put a label on it so then the funding could start.
Sure.
Labels are always about.
Oh,
We don't need to be releasing deer to the wild. We don't even need the genomes because nothing's been proven after 57 years with all the technology they have and billions of dollars wasted. Just stop testing and the money goes away, and so does the label CWD.
If they took all the money that they've wasted on CWD and bought more ground for public hunting, how many more acres of public hunting would Missouri have if they, instead of all the money they spent on this CWD testing and crap, if they invested that into buying more public ground? Yep. But there again, that kind of feeds into the theory of what you guys were talking about earlier. They don't want more public ground because they don't want more people. They don't want people hunting.
Right.
That's the only thing that makes any sense is that they're anti-hunting and they want to kill hunting. Is the only thing that makes sense for why they're doing what they're doing.
They want to kill deer for their own good, and they want to stop you from killing deer for your own good, because the government is your friend, and the government looks out for you and your best interests always.
Yeah.
And you're saying invest the money. Well, honestly, even if they just burn the money,
yeah, exactly.
You'd still have a better outcome because at least the deer would still be alive.
At least we'd have all the deer they didn't kill, and we'd have a warm fire for the big pile of money that they've basically burnt anyway. So it's crazy.
Yep.
You guys have anything else to add to this discussion before we head out?
I think I'd beat a dead horse till she's as dead as
rotten for sure.
As dead as the brain dead people are that run the MDC. So that's about all I could say.
There you go, man.
I've just put a big target on my. I got a big target on me now, probably from the Missouri Department of Conservation, which
we all
is
do.
fine with me. If I got to take one for the team, for everybody, bring it. I don't care. You're all a bunch of evil, corrupt criminals, as far as I'm concerned.
You're right, Jay. We've been called every name in the book too. But you know what? There's more people behind us. They just need to stand up.
Yep.
Well, hopefully, Jay, you can get a hold of Donald Jr. and get something to happen, because this would be an easy department to axe. Nobody cares about it. The only people who care about it are currently working for the department.
Well,
no civilian cares about this department, I'm sure.
As we've been talking, I've already sent out a couple texts, and I'm planning on sending one to Ted as soon as we get off of here. So
we'll do another podcast with whoever we can get. We'll do them.
So my closing remarks are, in the health business, I've been encouraging people to leave the cities for several years, and that's primarily because of EMF, electromagnetic frequencies. That's a conversation we're not going to get into, but I've tried to make the case that life can be better in the country. I bought a little house out in a little country town that costs less than most people's cars. And my friend and I, we paid that house off so quick, all of our friends were stunned. They're saying, I've been paying off my mortgage for 15 years. You guys were bums a couple of years ago, and now you own your house. It's because it was in the country. It was a better deal. And life is better for me out there. One of the reasons is because less EMF. Another reason is because it's more peaceful. I just flat out enjoy it. I've lived in big cities. I've lived in downtowns and all this stuff, and nothing compares to the country. I love it. Now, maybe it's not for everybody, but when everybody is complaining about the price and the cost of living and they don't know what to do, and there's this whole hopeless generation coming up, I'm encouraging them to get outside more, and not just to your local park where you just walk around and it's boring, but when you get into the lifestyle of being out in the country, there's so much to do where it revolves around enjoying the world as it is and enjoying the people with you. It's a totally different atmosphere in the country than it is in the city. And Cost of living is one of those major things, but we're seeing right now what everybody agrees. Mainstream health world, alternative health world, major universities, everyone agrees that we're currently seeing the most depressed and anxious generation that has ever existed. And that's the generation that's growing up right now. Generation Z, and I'm sure Generation Alpha is going to beat those numbers. And those are not good numbers to want to beat. They're the most depressed, they're the most anxious, and they spend the most time on their screens. They have the least hope for humanity, the least hope for their own future. They don't know what to do with their own lives. They're lost. They're buried in debt, many of them, for university degrees that won't do anything for them. They're going to be working at Starbucks paying off their debt until they're 62 years old. So, this whole lost generation here is lost in large part because of the addiction to their phones and to their tablets, which is not entirely their fault. It was given to them when they were little kids. Us adults have a difficult time controlling ourselves on these devices. Well, we just gave this electronic crack to our kids, not my kids, but kids in general, this generation, and it's ruined them according to themselves. They're the ones that are reporting that they're the most depressed and anxious of anyone who's ever existed, right? These are surveys. This is not them being diagnosed by clinicians here, although that's part of it as well. But to their own survey data, they admit that they're the most miserable generation ever. They're more depressed and anxious than people who lived through both world wars and the depression, and people who didn't have plumbing when they grew up and didn't have anything. Poor people who grew up in the middle of Missouri with a hole in the backyard to go to the bathroom in. These people have everything, these kids have everything, and yet they're the most miserable generation ever. I know that's a bit of a spiel here, and I think that's something we all know, but you should know that data does support that. This is a fact. This is an epidemic. This is a plague. They don't know what to do with their futures, and one of the things they might want to do is get the heck out of the city and unplug from all these things that distract from real life. I run my business on social media. I spend a lot of time on social media. I promise there's no fulfillment there. This new generation simultaneously admits that they're the most depressed ever, and yet they want to be an influencer for a living. It makes no sense. Especially as an influencer, I can promise you that even if you're successful, there's zero fulfillment online. Sure, most people watching this will know this, but we're all concerned about the generations growing up. And one of the biggest concerns for me is that they can't think outside of the city. They can't take their mind. Nothing exists outside of the city. And I know that because I lived in the city. I grew up there. There was nothing beyond the boundaries. There was no reason to go there. There was no idea of what happens there. There was no appreciation for nature as it is and friends as they are and family getting together and doing simple things like waiting for a deer that is probably not even going to come that day, but maybe one day it will and maybe you'll shoot it. It's such a simple thing, but we've been taken away from the simple things. We've been given all these complicated distractions, none of which make us satisfied in any single way. And many people are realizing this and still don't know what to do about it. Well, my opinion here is consider getting out in nature, doing some things that bring us closer to nature. Hunting is one of them. You guys are proof of that. You guys and the other hunters that I know are actually the most well-adjusted people that I know. They're not dealing with all these stresses and anxieties and trying to be social media stars and spending 6 years in school for something they know they'll never get a job for. It's just, you're not lost. You have something to look forward to. People without these hobbies have nothing to look forward to. They're spending their weekends on their phones or spending money on stuff they don't need. And it's crazy. It's sad. And I don't know where the future is going. But I hope more of us go into the country. This is a huge continent here. Most of the world is empty. I've taken a train across Europe and I was blown away. It's mostly empty, just like America. It's mostly farm fields and forests and stuff. But everyone's crammed into these ant farms in the city and wondering why they're miserable. And there's a lot of reasons for that, including nutrition, including EMF. But I think one of the massive reasons is we're just taken completely away from nature.
I'm staying in the country. Me and my dog.
As you should.
Can't beat it. I really appreciate it, Jay and Ryan. Thank you guys so much for
I
this.
appreciate you having me, and hopefully we've done some good. Somebody will maybe listen to this and do a little of their own research and we'll definitely keep fighting the good fight. That's all we can do.
That's right. Keep sharing.
Yes.
I hope so as well. I hope to see more deer out there. I get happy every time I see a deer that's alive. It's not on the side of the road or something like that. You know, it's just a joy. It's a joy to see. It's a joy to see a moose. It's a joy to see a bear. It's a joy to see a duck. It's part of our natural world that a lot of people have been taken very, very far away from. So hopefully we can see more of it in the future. And I appreciate both you guys for joining. And I appreciate David and Jan who are no longer here, but it was good to have them on too. And of course, guys, we can do this anytime. Hope this gets the word out even a little bit and even wakes even just one person up to this. Maybe that one person could do something about this. Maybe it encourages them to go try hunting or go try fishing or just to go outside even a little bit because we need to preserve these activities or they will be gone. They will be gone. Every kid that's raised on video games is not going to teach their kid how to hunt or fish. And if we lose these things, I think we're losing something major. And we're losing the reasons to preserve the wildlife and all this stuff. There's lots of things behind this. So there's lots at stake to me.
Yep.
Thanks so much, Ryan, for putting this thing together and thinking
Yeah.
of.
Thank you.
Of
We'll be in
course.
touch.
Anytime, guys.
See ya.
Appreciate you both. Stay healthy, my friends.
You too.
Until next time.
Later.